Chapter 18, Fallout. Dr. Maggie Henson trailed along behind the human vortex of pure anger that was Dr. Thomas Edwards. The two of them marched through the harmonics lab, ignoring the startled stares of the scientists and engineers working there, and went straight to the door on the second level. A plaque on the door announced that, on the other side, you could find the office of Dr. Paul Belchik. Tom slammed the door open with considerably more force than was necessary, startling both Paul and Major Morris, who were sitting at a table and discussing something, most likely about the project. "You'd better have a damned good explanation for this, Paul," Tom said, waving his tablet around. Paul scowled, and resumed sitting after having bolted half out of his chair at the unexpected intrusion. "If the internet is down again, you should talk to IT. And, if you ever burst in like this again." "Shut it," Tom growled, marching forward. Even though Paul towered over the skinny scientist, the larger man pulled back defensively. Maggie mentally applauded her firebrand colleague. She was extremely angry, herself, but nobody could do furious as well as Dr. Thomas Edwards. You had to hand it to the man, he turned it into an art form. Tom slammed his tablet down on the table between them. "There," he said. "Explain that code. What is that doing in my implants?" "I'm not a programmer, Tom," Paul said, pushing the tablet away. "Perhaps we should discuss this after you've calmed down." "We're discussing this now." Tom snapped back. "Which one of my team did you coerce into supplying you with this code?" "I think we should all just settle down," Major Morris said. Maggie liked the young man, and dearly hoped he'd be on their side. Only in his 30s, he was handsome and reserved, and, though not a scientist himself, had proven himself to be no slouch when it came to critical thinking and scientific understanding. "If only I were 20 years younger," she sighed, then put the thought out of her mind to address him. "I think you'll be interested in what we've discovered, Major," Maggie said. "Oh. It involves an abuse of the auto-override function," she continued. "I see. Please, explain," the Major said, taking out his tablet and tapping the screen briefly. He laid the tablet on the table in front of him, folded his hands, and looked at the pair of them expectantly. Tom snatched up his own tablet, typed a few commands, and then handed it to the Major. "On the left, you'll see my original code. Not that I expect you to understand it," he said, and Maggie flinched. The man had no tact. "But I assure you, it works exactly as discussed in committee. Usable only if Ms. Olson was passed out or incapacitated, and she could easily veto the override if she woke up. On the right, you'll see the bloated, Frankensteinian mess that some fool hacked together and uploaded without my consent or knowledge. Instead of being an emergency retrieval function, it became a remote control. Ms. Olson would no longer be able to override the override, and it could be set to perform certain actions under specific sets of criteria." Major Morris looked displeased. Maggie was happy to see. "What sort of criteria?" "Any criteria, essentially," Maggie said. "Such as, let's say she wanted to tell her friends that she was from another dimension, it could shut her down completely, leaving her in a coma." She looked at Paul, who was scowling at her. "You may head up the project, Paul," she told him, "but these are my labs. My team's. And, after you activated it yesterday, several of my team came forward to me with ethical complaints. I reviewed, and copied, the security takes here." She took a data stick out of her pocket and waved it at him. "There's also the small fact that you've been administering mood-altering drugs to her pretty much the entire time she seemed to assert any independence from you," she continued. "There were supposed to be anti-anxiety meds and antidepressants, which were to be used only in the event of an absolute emotional breakdown if immediate retrieval wasn't an option. In addition, there were supposed to be a variety of medicines, painkillers, antibiotics and the like. But according to what I've found, you've changed her medical loadout for various mood-altering compounds. We couldn't risk her blowing the mission due to a momentary weakness," Paul asserted firmly. "If I hadn't done that, she would have told the ponies all about us a week ago." "It's not right, Paul," Tom said, "and I won't stand for it." "You won't have a choice," Paul said. "I'm sorry, but you're both fired." "You can't do that," Tom protested, shocked. The project, Paul interrupted smoothly, "is far enough along to survive the loss of a couple of its senior scientists. And I can't have you questioning my orders. Major, if you'd be so kind as to have these two placed under arrest and confined to quarters." "Sorry, Doctor," Major Morris said. "I'm here in an advisory capacity. Not only am I not in your direct chain of command, I don't have the authority to arrest any senior members of the harmonics staff. However, I do know someone who can." He picked up his tablet and addressed it. "Did you get all that, sir?" "I did," a voice said from the tablet. "Let me address Dr. Belchik, please." Major Morris held out his tablet so that the rest of the room could see the screen. An elderly man, dressed in a suit and tie, stared back at them through a webcam. Maggie recognized him as Robert Thompson, chairman of the International Committee on Human Survival, which ran all official efforts opposing the Black Tide. "Hi, Paul," the man on the screen said. "Bob," Paul replied. "It's always a pleasure." "Typically, yes. But perhaps not so much today. Did I hear that correctly, Paul? Did you authorize the change of programming on the override to prevent Erin from partaking in an action you objected to?" "That's correct, yes. But I considered a simple yes or no will suffice," the chairman replied. Paul frowned at the interruption. "And, you've been manipulating her moods with implanted drugs." "Well, yes. She had to be kept on task. All that, worrying about her friends that she was doing was a distraction and a danger. Not to mention that she was showing an alarming resistance to following orders." "I see. And you thought your actions were appropriate?" "Yes, of course. It was for the greater good. Why am I the one being questioned here? Everything I did to ensure humanity's survival. A goal I happen to share, Paul. However, I question your methods and I question your ethics." Maggie smiled with relief. It looked like things were going to go their way, after all. How they were going to construct the pony body had been discussed at length long before Erin had even volunteered. All sorts of scenarios were considered before determining the final configuration. The auto-override itself was supposed to be there only to make sure they could retrieve a badly injured or unconscious explorer. The drug injectors were meant to only be used in the case of a psychological or medical emergency. But Paul, according to the records, had been abusing the drugs any time Erin had shown a contrary attitude, and had primed the override on no less than 3 separate occasions. Now, she had needed some sort of evidence, though, and, working with Tom, they'd found it, not only in the communications logs and the security tapes of each session during an open window, but also in the very code that had been pushed out to Erin's pony body after she'd been deployed. They had bundled that information and sent it to the rest of the Harmonics committee members and the entirety of the International Committee on Human Survival about an hour before the confrontation. However, she had been afraid that they would have no backup, that everyone would agree that these steps were necessary. She'd prepared herself to be arrested the moment they confronted Paul about the ethical violations. When it comes to the greater good, Robert continued, there comes a point when you cross a line, and you have to consider whether the greater good is really worth it. Erin is a volunteer, and a very brave young lady. If she was determined to take a course of action that would undermine our diplomatic efforts, the correct course of action would have been to pull her out of the field. Under no circumstances could I, as a retired officer of the United States Army or as a citizen of this great nation, condone what is, in essence, a form of slavery. She deserves our respect and support, not our manipulation. Major, sir. Outside of the office door you will find 2 MPs. Please inform them that Dr. Velchik is to be confined to quarters until further notice. What? Paul exploded. You can't do this. I just did, Bob replied wearily. Dr. Velchik, you are relieved. Dr. Hansen, you are now in charge. Yes, sir, Maggie said, stunned by the turn of events. Major Morris let the MPs in, who proceeded to escort the apoplectic Paul Velchik out of his office. You can't do this. The project needs me. If the project can survive the loss of 2 senior scientists, Dr. Velchik, said Senator Thompson from the tablet screen, then I'm certain it will not have a problem with the loss of just one. The door closed. Maggie could hear Paul's voice fading in the distance as he was escorted out of the labs. On the tablet screen, which was currently resting on the table, she heard the chairman sigh. That man's been my friend for years. I had no idea he would do something like this. He's not a bad man, Maggie said. He just got a little overzealous, I think. Maybe the stress got to him. These are tough times for everyone, Thompson agreed. Well, it's something we'll have to work out later, I'm afraid. For now, I have a considerable amount of paperwork to complete. Enjoy your new office, Dr. Hansen. Maggie, please, she prompted him. Maggie, then. Have a good day. With that, the screen went dark as the call was disconnected. Still feeling rocked by the day's events, Maggie stared at Tom, who frowned back at her. Why didn't I get to be in charge, he asked. Tilde asterisk tilde tilde. The 7 of them, which included Spike, were in a large private lounge in Canterlot Castle. After Sunflower had passed out, Celestia had quickly examined her and determined that there were no obvious physical reasons for her unconsciousness. Concerned for the mayor's well-being, Celestia had issued a few last-minute instructions and then teleported both herself and Sunflower back to Canterlot. Professor Glimmer, along with the now awake but still slightly woozy Thunderflash and Vortex, had all climbed into the second carriage to make their way back to Ponyville and continue their mission investigating the ripples. The rest of them had climbed into the first carriage and, with Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash flying, had made their way to Canterlot, stopping occasionally on the way for the Pegasus to rest. They had arrived a short while ago and were informed that Sunflower was still unconscious, a fact that baffled the royal doctors who had examined her. With her friends eager for explanations, Twilight had suggested that they find a private area to discuss things. Okay, Rainbow Dash said, waving a hoof. Forget about the ripples thing. I get that Sunflower is some kind of an alien. What is she doing here, though? Rainbow Dash was hovering near the ceiling with her forelegs crossed over her chest and a scowl on her face. Pinkie Pie was curled up in a ball on a nearby couch, with her back facing the rest of the group. Twilight would have assumed she was asleep if she hadn't seen her pink ears twitching every once in a while as she talked. Fluttershy was sitting placidly next to Rarity, who looked both intrigued and overwhelmed by the information. Applejack was sitting on the floor, frowning down at her hooves. Spike was busily serving drinks while wearing an adorable little apron he'd found somewhere. I don't know, Twilight replied. She spent quite a lot of time at the library, learning new things. So she was a spy, Rainbow interrupted angrily. I didn't say that, Twilight said, annoyed. If you suddenly found yourself in a strange world full of ponies who were completely different than you, wouldn't you try to learn all you could about them? That doesn't make her a spy. But she could be, Rainbow countered acidly. Right. She could be, Twilight admitted reluctantly. Pinkie sighed heavily at that, but otherwise didn't move. I trusted her, Danged. I liked her, and now she's some sort of spy for an alien world, Rainbow said, getting worked up. Like I said, we don't know that. We don't know anything, and we won't until she wakes up. And when will that be? I don't know, Rainbow, Twilight said, sadly. Initial examinations of Sunflower indicated that she was perfectly healthy. There was no reason for her to be in a coma, as far as any pony could tell. A specialist was examining her currently, and they might know more soon. I still think she's nice, Fluttershy said, softly. What? Rainbow was incredulous. How can you say that? She always took the time to talk to me and ask after my animals when she came to visit, Fluttershy said. She was probably gathering information to send back to her alien masters. Well, what about making my medical supplies a priority? 2 times in the last week she visited me after work hours just to drop off a package that had arrived, that wasn't due to be delivered until the next day. She didn't have to do that, Fluttershy asserted. Whatever, Rainbow said, clearly not willing to concede the point. Twilight could understand that. She, too, had been very upset at discovering that Sunflower was from another world. What do you think, AJ? Rainbow asked, challengingly. Well, I'm mighty hurt. I trusted her too, the farm pony replied. But I also reckon that Sunflower was a mighty nice mare, always smilin' at every pony, willin' to drop what she was doin' to lend a hoof if needed. She bought us presents, too. She didn't have to do that. You mean, bribes, Rainbow Dash said. I mean presents, Rainbow, Applejack responded, annoyed. She didn't ask for nothin', she just wanted to give us presents, 'cause she liked us. Rainbow Dash grimaced and rolled her eyes, while AJ continued. There's also the small matter of how she tried to fight off a chimera to save Apple Bloom, Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle, you recall. I don't reckon I know if I can ever forgive her for lying to me, but I reckon I owe her a chance to explain why she did. She did try to save the girls' lives at great risk to her own, Rarity said, thoughtfully. Any pony that does that, well, they have to have some good in 'em, don't they? Fine, Rainbow sulked. I'll give her a chance to explain. Just don't expect me to trust her ever again. Nopany can ask for anything else, Rainbow, Applejack replied, standing up. Well, Yal will excuse me, it's been a mightily long day, it's late, and I could use some sleep. Good night, Yal. With that, Applejack left, head low. Rainbow Dash left without saying another word, flying out through a nearby window and up to her room. Rarity and Fluttershy, both with a concerned glance towards the unresponsive Pinkie Pie, excused themselves as well. That left Twilight Sparkle alone with the curled-up pink pony. Pinkie, she asked, are you okay? No, said Pinkie, her voice sounding odd without its usual bubbliness. You're upset about this too, Twilight said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Yes. I'm here to talk about it if you want, Pinkie, Twilight said, laying a hoof on her friend's shoulder. Pinkie's head popped up, and Twilight heard her sniffle. Still facing away from her, Pinkie reached back with a leg, hooking Twilight's leg with her own and bringing it around in a hug. I don't like it when my friends lie to me, Pinkie said quietly, hugging Twilight's foreleg tightly. I know, Twilight said, stroking Pinkie's mane with her free hoof. I know. Tilde asterisk tilde tilde. The specialist had found nothing wrong, and had since been dismissed. In desperation, Celestia had called her sister in to look at the comatose mare. There are devices planted through her body, Luna said after examining her briefly. Celestia blinked at her sister in surprise, then glanced back at the unconscious form of the mare Sunflower. She extended her senses and found what Luna had been talking about. What are those things? She asked, vaguely horrified. I cannot say, Luna replied. I have never seen anything of the sort in my entire life. Nor have you, I would guess. No, never. She wasn't surprised that her sister had discovered the devices implanted in the mare before she had herself. Luna's magic and mind had always been the more subtle of the two. Do you believe they could be safely removed? She asked. I don't see why not, for most of them. They don't impact any vital areas. However, this one, Luna said, highlighting an area at the base of Sunflower's skull with her magic, this one goes directly into her spine as well as her brain. If I were to guess, I would say that this is the one that makes her sleep. It would be risky to remove it, sister, Celestia said. Indeed. But would it not be riskier to leave it in? How so? The one you called Malachite, I am guessing that was what he was referring to when he said he could stop her heart. As you can see, it controls all autonomous and voluntary muscles in the body. It is likely that, whoever sent Sunflower here, they implanted this device in order to control her. Luna didn't have to say any more. Celestia considered the implications of that. A creature that gained control over that device implanted in the mare's head would have full control over every action that she could possibly do, including hurting herself or other ponies. Not to mention, her masters may decide to terminate Sunflower the moment they discovered that she'd been captured. Forgetting even the valuable information that they could attain from her, Celestia wasn't about to let her be murdered just to keep her quiet. You are right, Luna. We should remove it immediately. Do you feel up to it? Yes, she replied simply. Very well, then. We shall begin at once. Tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Erin groaned, opening her eyes. She felt like she'd been pulled backwards through a meat grinder. Her whole body throbbed, and her head felt like it was splitting open. She moved her head slightly, and her stomach roiled with nausea. Ah, you're awake, a voice said. Erin blinked, then cautiously turned her head. There was an unfamiliar earth pony in a nurse's uniform standing in the corner of the room. Erin regarded her groggily. I'll just notify the princesses. You try to relax, all right. The mare slipped out the door, which closed with a soft click. Erin let her aching head drop back into the pillow, and regarded her surroundings with a certain amount of wariness. The room she was in was huge. Almost the entire guest house, both floors, could fit in here. And that wasn't counting the door that apparently led to a private bathroom. The high, sky blue ceiling was decorated with clouds and flying birds. The walls themselves were a pale blue, almost white in color. The floor was an odd blue and red checkerboard pattern, with several large rugs over the top of it. The furnishings spoke of simple elegance, delicately carved dresses and wardrobes, a writing desk and stool, all in white painted wood. Several framed paintings were hung on the walls, in frames of dark oak with gold trim. At a guess, Erin thought, I am in the castle. She glanced down at her own body, which was covered with a sheet. Finding very little strength in her limbs, she began pulling the sheet off. What she saw confused her. Her entire body, or at least most of it, was covered in wrapped bandages. She reached up and felt at her head. Another bandage, but she distinctly remembered that the light that had driven Malachite out of her had also healed her injuries. Her face, swollen from running headfirst into a tree when Malachite was still first learning to control her, had stopped hurting and returned to its normal dimensions. The stings and scrapes along her sides and flanks had closed up. She felt the unusual sensation of her hooves, some of which had cracked open and all of which had at least one rock lodged in them, joining back together and expelling any foreign matter. So, why was she covered in bandages? And why did she ache so badly? The door opened shortly after that, and Princess Celestia walked in. Good evening, Sunflower. I'm glad to see that you're awake, the princess said, sounding sincere. Thank you, Princess, Erin replied, looking down at her sheets. And, thank you for saving me. How do you feel? Celestia asked. Like I've been taken apart and put back together, Erin said. This isn't too far from the truth, I'm afraid, Celestia replied. Erin glanced up, confused. We found a number of devices all over your body. One in particular was attached to your brain and nervous system, and connected thusly to all of your muscles, including your heart. We believed it was the device that was forcing you to stay unconscious, and we also considered it to be a risk to your life. So, we removed it. You removed my implants, Erin said, surprised. Just the one. We weren't certain what it was for, but we knew that it could be used to control you in exactly the same way Malachite had. Erin flinched back at the reminder, glancing away from the beautiful princess. The device had threads, I imagine you could say, running through your entire body. It took some time to remove them all, even with magic. My sister, Luna, did most of the work. She is very curious about the devices, and may stop by once you're recovered to ask you about them. Erin nodded, unable to meet Celestia's gaze. You are a guest here at the castle, Celestia continued. I'm not certain what brings you to our world, but the picture I received from talking to your Ponyville friends makes me believe that you don't intend us any harm. For now, I would like you to rest and recover. There will be time for explanations later. With that, Celestia began walking away. A thought occurred to Erin. Princess. Celestia stopped, looking back at her. Yes. You said you talked to my Ponyville friends. Does that include Meadowlark from the guest house? No, the princess replied. I spoke to Twilight Sparkle and her friends. Is Meadowlark a friend as well? Yes, and her filly Marigold, Erin replied. And, they saw me become possessed. Could some pony let them know that I'm okay? I don't want them to worry. Celestia smiled gently. I will do that. Thank you for considering their feelings, Sunflower. Princess. One last thing. Yes. She took a deep, shuddering breath and expelled it, bracing herself. Chapter 19. Discussions. Celestia closed the door behind her gently, so as to not wake the sleeping mare inside. When she glanced up and saw Luna patiently waiting in the hallway, she stepped forward to nuzzle her little sister affectionately. Celestia. Luna whispered, blushing. Stop, the guards are watching. She chuckled and drew back. Her sister always had found public displays of affection to be embarrassing. Glancing at the guards, she saw that they were staring forward stoically. She's currently asleep, she told them. Please ask the nurse to check in, quietly, every hour to see if she needs anything. The guards saluted, and Celestia inclined her head, indicating to Luna that she'd like to walk together. Luna nodded and fell in beside her in the white hallway of Canterlot Castle. How is she? She seems well. She is in some pain, but that will pass. Ah, that is good, Luna said, relieved. You were in there for quite some time. I was concerned that something was wrong. The poor dear simply wanted to talk. I kept insisting she rest, but she had so much that she wanted to say. I gather that she's been eager to talk to us for quite some time, but her superiors have forbidden her to do so. Indeed. So she is from another world, then? Yes. Her actual name is Erin, and she's something called a human. They use technology to turn her into a pony and fabricate a cutie mark. Such technology exists. Luna asked, looking skeptical. It's difficult to imagine such a thing. Even using magic, it would take considerable skill and effort to change a creature from one species to another. She says that it is true, and I have no reason to doubt her. Apparently, magic doesn't exist on her world, which they call Earth, oddly enough. They've had to excel in technology to compensate. No magic? Asked Luna, shuddering at the thought. I don't believe I would like that world. Celestia nodded in agreement. Magic was such an integral part of pony life, not being able to access it would be difficult, like losing her wings or her eyes. The sisters turned at a corner, walking towards Celestia's private study. The tapestries on the wall, some of which were centuries old, gave the otherwise stark hallway some life and color. So, what is it they want with us? Are we under threat of invasion? No, Celestia replied, and, yes, at the same time. Apparently, their entire world is being taken over by some sort of plague they call the Black Tide. It destroys all life it contacts, and is slowly consuming their world. They are looking for a new home, and our world is the first one they've come across that they could actually survive in. I'm sure we can accommodate some refugees, considering the situation, Luna said. How many are there? Apparently, there are around 7 billion of them, Celestia replied, taking a small amount of guilty pleasure at Luna's slack-jawed expression of surprise. 7 billion. Is that correct? Billion. When Celestia nodded, Luna continued with, are you certain that the word, billion, on their world means the same as it does on ours? Yes, I'm quite sure, Celestia said. Luna was momentarily dumbstruck, as Celestia herself had been when she'd heard that same news from Erin. Celestia, it is not possible for us to accommodate that many of these humans for any length of time. Not unless they are all the size of ants. Apparently, they are larger than the average pony, standing about as tall as you or I. Oh, my. This will be difficult, indeed. How will we help them? Luna asked. Celestia stopped and smiled, nuzzling her sister affectionately once again. What was that for? Luna asked, blushing again. For asking how we would help them, rather than asking if we should, or how we could stop them from coming. Celestia smiled, then, regarding your question, I have some ideas. I'm going to convene some of my ministers and advisors in my private study to discuss some of our options. We should also talk to the ambassadors for the foreign nations, in order to keep them informed. A very good idea, sister. Come, let us make some plans for the future, shall we? No, Luna said. Celestia looked at her in surprise. Sister, you have just spoken to a former student and protege of yours who returned, apparently from the dead, by practicing some of the foulest, most forbidden magic I can imagine. You then saw him destroyed by the elements of harmony. Please, do not pretend you are unaffected. Sometimes, life gives you burdens, and occasionally those burdens can be too much to bear on your own. When you live a life spanning centuries, that is even more true. There are simply times when even the wisdom of a millennium can't guide you through the rough spots. There are two ways to deal with the burdens of life, when they get to be too much. You can lie, both to others and to yourself, pretending that you are strong enough to deal with these things on your own. Or, you can face the harsh truth, admit that it is too much for you, and rely on those who love and care for you to help you shoulder your burden. Celestia bowed her head. You are, of course, quite right, Luna. My heart has been tied in knots since the encounter. Would you like to talk about it? Celestia considered that for a while, then nodded. I think I would. Very much. Thank you, Luna. Celestia nuzzled her sister again. This time, the younger sister returned the gesture. Of course, Celestia. What are sisters for? Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. The friends were sitting in the dining area of their private apartments, eating a quiet dinner. The chefs had gone all out, but Twilight had very little appetite, mostly just pushing the food around on her plate. She had quite a few things to think about, and the princess hadn't been willing to share any of the information that Sunflower had told her 2 days ago. They had been forbidden from seeing the mayor, not by Celestia, but by her doctor, who refused to let her undergo any stress while she was still recuperating. The wait was frustrating, and they were all dealing with it in their own ways. While they were waiting for Sunflower to be ready to talk, Twilight had sent Spike to stay with her parents. The little dragon had protested at first, but the promise of warm, fresh-baked cookies lured him away in the end. The door cracked open, and Celestia walked in. All activity around the table ceased as the princess spoke. She is awake, the princess stated. She would like to see you all. Twilight put down her fork and stood, glancing at the others around the table. Pinkie Pie looked excited and determined at the same time. Applejack looked reluctant, and Rainbow Dash looked angry, which was not a surprise. The Pegasus had been working herself up ever since she'd found out about Sunflower not being from Equestria. Rarity couldn't be read at all as she dabbed gently at her mouth with a napkin before standing. Fluttershy simply looked nervous, but that was hardly unusual. Twilight, herself, was concerned, anxious, and curious. She wanted to know everything about where Sunflower was from, but on the other hoof, she was worried that what she'd find out would make her hate the mayor. The walk to the room in which Sunflower was resting was oddly quiet and subdued. No one said anything, as they were all caught up in their own thoughts. It didn't take long before they reached a room with 2 armored unicorn guards standing out in front. Celestia indicated that this was, indeed, the room that Sunflower was resting in. You have guards on her door? Twilight asked. For some reason, that bothered her. A simple precaution, though I no longer really believe they are necessary, Celestia replied. I truly don't believe she means us any harm, though her presence here will no doubt cause us difficulties. You've talked to her, Princess? Rainbow Dash asked. She definitely is a spy, then. I will let her explain it to you, Rainbow Dash. It's really her story to tell. With that, Celestia opened the door and let the 6 friends inside before entering the room herself and closing the door behind her. Twilight's horn began to glow softly as she cast her lie detector spell. She didn't bother hiding it this time, and she had told her friends earlier that she would be casting this spell once they had a chance to talk to Sunflower. Celestia glanced at her horn, but aside from a nod of acknowledgement, didn't say anything. Sunflower, her head wrapped in a thick bandage, was sitting up in the bed and propped up by several pillows. She glanced up briefly as the door opened, and then returned to looking down at her front hooves, which were on the bed before her. Twilight was alarmed to notice she had several other bandages around her body as well. What happened? She asked the princess. Did she get hurt? Ah, the bandages. She had some sort of device implanted in her body. Luna and I thought it would be a good idea to remove it, as that was what was keeping her asleep. Unfortunately, doing so required some surgery. We've accelerated her healing as much as is safe, and she will be right as rain in a day or 2. Sunflower glanced up again briefly, before quickly returning her gaze to her forehooves. Twilight detected shame in that quick glance, and it looked like the mayor had been crying recently. A moment of awkward silence ensued before Twilight broke it by clearing her throat. So. Sunflower, how are you feeling? Better than yesterday, she replied in a quiet voice. I still have some pain, but it's no big deal. And, my real name is Erin. I don't believe it, Rainbow Dash said angrily. Even your name was a lie. And what kind of a stupid name is that, anyway? Sunflower. Or, rather, Erin, flinched, unable to meet anybody's gaze. Rainbow, we promised to let her explain herself, Twilight reminded her friend gently. Rainbow snorted and sat down heavily. Fine, then. Let's hear it, Rainbow said. But this had better be good, Erin. Okay, well. I suppose I'd better start from the beginning, Erin said. She gathered her thoughts for a moment before continuing. Well, as you know now, I'm not from Equestria. I was sent here because our world is, well, not to be melodramatic, but it's doomed. There's this thing that we call the Black Tide. It came from space almost 3 years ago and crashed into our world. It's hard to describe what it is, because we don't really even know ourselves. But imagine this ooze that is spreading out of where this thing landed. Everything it touches, it melts it, I guess you could say. It absorbs it, and turns it into more of itself. It's doing that to everything. Plants, animals, people, even the dirt and the rocks. That's why I came here, she continued. We very recently found out how to travel between different realities, and we are looking for a place where we can evacuate everyone to. It's really the only hope for our people. Otherwise, billions will die. Billions. Twilight asked, astonished. Erin nodded. Well, why didn't y'all just ask us, instead of sneaking around like this? Demanded Applejack. We didn't know anything about you. We didn't know anything about Equestria, really. Well, wait, no, that's not completely true. We knew a little bit. We'd opened some windows. What I gather you call ripples, from our world to yours. We even created a few fissures and sent some probes through. I've never seen them before, but I'm sure that's what those black things were that Malachite was using to try and stop you from reaching me. So why did your probe things help out a bad guy? Asked Pinkie Pie. I don't know, but I can guess. Somehow he was able to. Well, we call it hacking, when you bypass the security on a device and take it over. Somehow, he was able to take them over one by one. And, somehow, that led him to me. I still don't know how he managed to take me over, though. I think we're getting off track with the probes, Twilight said. I accept your explanation on them for now, but I think we should return to why you came to Equestria, and why you didn't just ask us for help. You were saying how you didn't know much about us. Erin returned her gaze to her hooves, fiddling with them awkwardly. Yes, that's right. We didn't know a whole lot about you. We knew what you looked like, we knew a few basic details about Equestria, like your gravity is slightly less than ours. What we didn't know were details like, could we eat the food here, or would it poison us? Was there any kind of weird radiation or something that we didn't know about that would kill us? And, for you ponies, would you accept us? Would you try to help us or try to fight us? We had to find these things out, and so I volunteered to come here. Wait, you ponies. Twilight said. You're not a pony. Erin flinched again. No, I'm not. I was turned into one to fit in better, she admitted. Twilight noted that her friends reacted very differently to the news. Applejack and Rainbow Dash just seemed more angry, whereas Rarity and Pinkie both seemed more confused than anything. Fluttershy was staring at Erin with unease, as if she expected the bandaged mare to suddenly spring at her. And how do I feel about it? Twilight wondered. Probably much the same as her friends, she realized. But also curious. Very curious, indeed. So what were you? Twilight asked. I'm a human, she said. I suppose I could describe us for you. We call our world the Earth. We stand. Oh, I'd say the average is slightly shorter than Princess Celestia, if you include her horn. We stand on 2 legs, and we have arms with hands, kind of like Spike, though without the claws. We're mostly hairless, except for the tops of our heads and a few other places. Unlike ponies, we wear clothes pretty much all the time. Since we don't have any magic on Earth, we had to get really good with science and engineering. Wait, Twilight interrupted. You don't have magic on Earth. How did you get turned into a pony? We used something called nanotechnology. Basically, well, we made these very small machines, too small to even see. There were billions of them, and they basically broke down and rearranged my whole body to become a pony. Twilight was fascinated and mildly horrified by the thought of those machines. That sounds like a load of horse apples, Rainbow Dash said. I know how you feel, Erin said. I felt the same way about magic when I came here. So you were able to change like that without magic. That's wow, Twilight said, amazed. If your technology can do that kind of thing, I would really like to study it. And I wanted to study magic, Erin replied with a sad ghost of a smile. It's so different than anything I've ever seen. Rainbow Dash didn't seem satisfied, but also didn't seem to be able to figure out any specific reason as to why. She sat there, scowling at the floor, looking directionlessly angry. Wait a moment, then, Rarity said. Erin, that cutie mark story you told me, was it a lie? Erin blushed. I'm sorry, Rarity. The story itself was true, that really did happen when I was little, but humans don't get cutie marks. So, what does that sunflower on your butt mean? Rainbow Dash asked, acidly. Did you just pick it out of a hat, or something? Almost, Erin admitted, and Rainbow snorted in disgust. We knew from our probes and such that all adult ponies had a cutie mark, though we didn't know that it was called that at the time. We thought they were some sort of tattoo, and the ponies just picked one when they got old enough. They gave me a list of what they thought would be acceptable cutie marks, but none of them seemed. Well, right to me. None of them seemed to fit. And then, one day, I think it was the day before I was due to start the process to become a pony, actually. I saw an article. It had a picture of this field of sunflowers on it, and they looked so vibrant and alive, you know. The article itself was about how we were going to lose so much of our natural world to the black tide. I was looking at that picture, and I was thinking that the tide would roll over everything, including that field of sunflowers. It made me incredibly sad to think that those flowers, and even the field they were planted in, would be gone forever within the next few years. And then I realized something. The mission that I was on was to find a new home, not just for us, but for as much life as we could save. That field of sunflowers would be gone soon. But if we survived, then we could plant more. Life would go on, we would go on, and I was determined that I was going to help to make that happen. So, in a way, my mission was about renewal, and survival, and hope. After that, the sunflower seemed like the only choice for me. It felt like a symbol of what I wanted to accomplish by coming here. It just seemed right. There was a long moment as the ponies looked at each other. Rarity spoke, breaking the silence. Well, I don't know about you girls, but that sounds like a cutie mark story to me. Indeed, it does, Celestia agreed. How do you mean? Erin asked, obviously confused. You struggled, and then found a purpose and an identity for yourself, Celestia said. In the end, you reached an epiphany that helped you discover who you were, and what you wanted to do. And then, you received a cutie mark. The princess smiled and added, it's not exactly in the traditional way. But as cutie mark stories go, it's not bad. There was a moment of silence as they mulled that over. Twilight conceded that Celestia had a point. Erin looked mildly pleased by Celestia's statement. So, what now, then? Applejack asked. What's gonna happen next? Well, from what I understand, we're going to be sending some human ambassadors here within the next week or two, to meet with the princesses and come to some sort of diplomatic arrangement. I meant, what's gonna happen with you, Erin? Oh. I really hadn't thought that far. I mean, all the humans are coming over here, so I'll be staying too. I really like Ponyville. I've never loved living in any place as much I've loved living there. She heaved a sigh and continued. But I suppose I've screwed everything up, there. I don't expect any pony to trust me anymore, especially once I get turned back to a human. You aren't staying a pony? Pinkie Pie asked, surprised. Probably not, Pinkie, Erin replied with a wry smile. I can't imagine what my mother would say if I did. Hold on, Rainbow said, scowling. Noppany said that you humans could come here. What if we just told you, no, tough luck? What then? We've been looking for months, and Equestria is the only world that we found that has even the chance to support human life. Our world is ending. We have, at most, maybe another 3 years left before the whole thing is engulfed by the black tide. Unless they've found another habitable world while I've been here, then the answer is simple. Regardless of what you say, we're coming over. We don't have a choice. It's that, or we all die. Besides, I don't think you would do that, Rainbow Dash. Oh, wanna bet? I don't think you could. Could you look a mother in the eye and tell her to take her children back to her doomed homeworld to die? Could you say that to a million mothers? Of course not, Fluttershy said firmly. Rainbow Dash looked like she wanted to say something, but then just looked away, deep in thought. Into the awkward silence that followed, Pinkie Pie calmly stepped forward. That leaves one very important question, though, she said. Probably the most important one, and Noppany has even asked it yet. Okay, Erin said, visibly bracing herself. What is it, Sunflower? Erin, whatever you want to call yourself. I have to know just one thing, Pinkie said, walking forward until she was standing directly in front of the alien mare, who looked back at her warily. I need to know, are you sorry at all for lying to us? Erin flinched back in surprise, and then her face contorted as her composure shattered. Yes, she sobbed. Every day, every single day, I hated myself for it. I hated every minute of it. I wanted to tell the truth, but at first I was too scared to. And then they kept telling me I couldn't. And I'd make up my mind every other day that I would tell you. I'd tell you all everything, and then they'd just end up talking me out of it. Erin was crying hard now, and Twilight started tearing up as well. She knew that Erin wasn't lying. Her spell told her that much. The other girls gave her a questioning look, and she nodded. Erin was telling the truth. She really was sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You deserve so much better than me. I didn't deserve your friendship. I'm sorry. Pinky reached out with a hoof and touched the sobbing mare gently on the shoulder. Erin looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from the tears, looking into the bright blue of Pinky's eyes. Pinky drew her into a tight hug, and Erin's eyes widened in surprise as she said, "In that case, I can forgive you." Slowly, Erin reached her own hooves up and hugged Pinky back, and then she started bawling again. Fluttershy, kind heart that she was already joining in on the hug and was crying herself. Rarity was dabbing at her eyes with a kerchief as she moved towards the three of them, placing a hoof on the crying mare's shoulder. Applejack had her hat pulled down low to hide her eyes. Rainbow Dash was looking away, muttering about having something in her eyes. Applejack stood up suddenly, and then hesitated, looking indecisive for a moment. "Oh, shucks. Me, too, I guess," she said, moving towards the bed. "I forgive ya, Erin." She didn't join in the hug, but she did put a hoof on Erin's shoulder, opposite of Rarity. Twilight examined her own feelings and found that, in spite of everything, she didn't hold a grudge. Erin truly did have a good reason for lying, with her whole world at stake and not knowing if the ponies would help or not. And, she obviously felt awful for the necessity. It was as if an iron band that had been constricting her heart suddenly released when she realized that she forgave the strange mare, and that she still considered her to be a friend. Smiling, crying, she moved to the bed and put a comforting hoof on the mare's leg. "Rainbow Dash?" she asked, looking back at the Pegasus. Rainbow scowled at the rest of them for a moment before heaving a heavy sigh. "Fine, I forgive her, I guess," she said, grudgingly. "But don't expect me to do a group hug when I'm still pretty mad, okay?" Twilight nodded at the Pegasus. Then she heard the door open, and glanced back to see that Celestia was leaving. "Princess." "Thank you," Twilight sparkled, "but no. Group hugs really aren't my thing," the princess said with a smile to let her know she was joking. "I'm glad you've all reconciled. I have a considerable number of preparations to make before the human ambassadors arrive, so I will leave you all to become reacquainted." The door closed with a soft click. Near the center of the group hug, Pinky looked back up and caught Erin's eye again. "Well, I guess there's just one more thing I need answered, in that case," she said. "What is it?" Erin asked. "Do humans like parties?" Erin laughed in surprise at that, the first sign of joy she'd displayed since she'd woken up. "Yes, Pinky," she replied, smiling. "We humans like parties a lot." "Well, then, you're all okay in my book." Erin laughed more, and the hug finally broke up, all the mares sniffling in the aftermath of emotion. Applejack was doing a fairly passable job of pretending that she hadn't cried at all. Erin cleared her throat a couple of times, then finally managed to talk, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much, girls. I honestly didn't expect you to forgive me." "You're not in the clear yet," Rainbow Dash said, and Applejack nodded in agreement. "Yup. You really hurt me with this whole thing, Erin. I expect you to not ever lie to me again. If ya do, well, I may not be so forgiving, next time." "What she said," Rainbow added. "I understand," Erin said. "And, I still have a lot more I need to tell you, if I'm coming clean now. And I want to tell you everything. But, before I start, can I just ask you all one thing?" "Sure thing, Sugar Cube. When I was possessed, in the forest," Erin said with a shudder. "What was that, with the rainbow? How did you do that?" The friends laughed, and Twilight said, "Well, let me tell you a story about the Summer Sun celebration 2 years ago." Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. "Ah, director." "Yes," Maggie replied, on her second day on the job as the new lead of Project Harmonix. "We, seem to be missing a few probes." "Oh, how many?" 90%. Maggie goggled at the tech for a moment. "We have 90% left, or we're missing 90%, she asked. We're down by 90%. Actually, 92. There are 38 left responding. And, of those, about a third are damaged in some way. What the heck happened? I don't know. Pulling the data now, but it's going to take a while to review." "Okay, well, keep me posted on that. Do we have a link on Erin yet?" "Just about, Mom," a different tech stated. "She's a bit further out than usual. We had to move a couple of the surviving drones around to act as relays, and it." "Oh. What?" Maggie asked warily. "Is she okay?" "Vitals are fine, but, somehow she's missing the auto-override implant." Dead silence filled the Harmonix lab while she rolled that over in her mind. "Okay," she said. "Get going on the data. I want to find out what happened as soon as possible. Get me a comm link to Erin, if you don't mind." "Yes, Mom," the two techs replied in unison. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. "That. Wow, that's so cool," Erin said, impressed. "So, this Discord guy is a statue now." "Yeah, he's out in the gardens, getting crapped on by a bunch of birds," Rainbow Dash said, laughing. Rainbow Dash, Rarity objected. "That's vulgar." "True, but that's what makes it hilarious." The friends were now sitting around the dinner table in the private apartments. Once they realized that they'd be talking for a while, with all they had to say, they decided to move somewhere more comfortable and to also finish the dinners. Erin was more than happy to get out of bed, in spite of the soreness. The nurse had objected at first, but had finally relented after extracting a promise from her to avoid strenuous activity. "Well, I think that's enough about Equestria for now," Twilight said to her. "Why don't we find out some more about Earth? I'd love to hear about your technology." Well, okay," Erin said, slightly disappointed. This had been the first time she'd been able to ask questions without having to be careful to not be discovered, and she'd been relishing the experience. Well, first of all, we were about where you guys are now, technology-wise, about. Oh, I'd say about 150 years ago. We had steam power, electricity, that kind of thing. But, as time went on, we found newer and better. She trailed off as she heard the soft click of an open connection in her ears. Momentary terror froze her. The last time she'd heard that sound, the voice that came through was Malachite's. Dread filled her as she waited to hear what came through next. Sunflower, are you all right? Twilight asked, concerned. A moment later, a voice came over the line. Not Dr. Velchik, but a voice she hadn't heard in nearly a month. Erin, can you get away to talk? Dr. Maggie Henson asked. I have some big news. Maggie, Erin said, surprised. The other ponies in the room looked at each other in confusion. Who or what is, Maggie, Sugarcube? Applejack asked. Erin, maybe you'd better excuse yourself, Maggie suggested. Erin shook her head. No, she said. They already know I'm not a pony, they may as well know the rest too. She saw that the 6 of them were now looking at her with confusion and mild concern. Erin decided that she'd better explain, quickly. I was meaning to tell you, she desperately told the ponies in the room, but I hadn't gotten around to it yet. I have all sorts of implants in my body that are intended to measure and analyze things here in Equestria. One of the implants I have is in my ears, mostly so that the people back on Earth can talk to me using, well, a wireless signal, which I can explain later. When a ripple happens between our worlds, we can actually force a fissure into being. Sometimes they're big enough for, well, for me to walk through. Sometimes they're only big enough to get a small signal through, like right now. They're talking to you now, aren't they? Twilight asked, excited. Erin, Maggie said, sounding nervous. Sorry, Maggie. I already promised to tell them everything. Yes, Twilight. They are connected right now. I can hear them, and they can hear everything I can hear, and see everything I can see. The humans can see and hear us, Fluttershy whispered, eyes wide. Yes, Fluttershy. Sorry. Fluttershy, eeped, and bolted for the door. Erin watched her go, feeling sad. Of course Fluttershy would find an invisible audience unnerving, but it felt like she'd committed yet another betrayal against the Pegasus. She sighed and turned back to her friends in the room, and was slightly startled to see a grinning Pinkie Pie standing barely an inch away from her face. That is so awesome, Pinkie said, and then grabbed Erin's head in her front hooves. Hello humans, she said, speaking slowly and loudly. My name is Pinkie Pie. They can hear you just fine, Pinkie, Erin said, laughing. I'm going to get into so much trouble, Maggie said in her ear. Why is that? Erin asked. I dunno, Pinkie Pie replied. Is it because they have really good ears? What? Erin asked. Said Pinkie Pie. Are you sure this is a good idea, Erin? Maggie asked. Yes, I think it is, Erin replied. It is because they have good ears, Pinkie asked, cocking her head to the side questioningly. Who has good ears? Erin asked, slightly lost. The humans have good ears. We do. That pony is confusing, Maggie complained. Well, you just said you did, Pinkie replied, crossly. That's true, Erin said in response to Dr. Henson. Then, in response to Pinkie, wait, I didn't say that. You're flip-flopping. Pinkie stomped her hoof in frustration. I am not, Erin asserted. We need to talk, Erin, Maggie said. You need to be a little less confusing, Erin, Pinkie said. We sure do, Erin replied to Maggie. Hey, what's with this, business? Pinkie asked. I'm making perfect sense. Twilight was laughing hard at this point, holding her ribs, and Rarity was chuckling. Applejack and Rainbow Dash were just grinning in confused amusement. I'm talking to Maggie, Pinkie. So Maggie is confusing, too, Pinkie asked. I like this one, Maggie said, chuckling. Who's on first? She's unique, that's for sure, Erin said. Wait a minute, Pinkie said, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. Did you mean me or Maggie? Yes, Erin replied, grinning. Pinkie frowned at her for a moment, then grinned back and started giggling. Oh, that was fun, the pink pony said, and Maggie laughed in her ear. The laughter died down after a moment, and Maggie turned serious. Anyway, Erin, some big things have happened here. There's a reason why I'm talking to you, instead of Paul Velchik. Is he okay? Erin asked, concerned. Dr. Velchik had been overbearing, but he'd been the only human voice she'd heard for weeks, now. Depends on who you ask. If you ask me, he's fine. If you ask him, he was unjustly placed under house arrest for ethics violations. What? Erin asked, stunned. Maggie sighed in her ear. You'd better be sitting down for this, honey, because it's a doozy, she said. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. He did what? Erin shouted, bolting to her hooves. Twilight flinched in surprise, as did the other non-human ponies in the room. Twilight decided that, on the whole, it was really creepy and weird being in the same room with some pony who was having a conversation with invisible people. Erin started pacing back and forth. She was obviously very upset, but Nopony wanted to interrupt the conversation to ask what was wrong. Twilight herself was sure that Erin would tell them once the conversation was done. Did you know this was going on? Erin asked, angrily. The 5 friends exchanged worried glances. There was a lengthy pause while Erin listened to the voice in her head, after which she said, Wait, Dr. Edwards. We're talking about the same guy. Another pause, after which she said, Well, I'm grateful for that. Please thank him for me. More listening for a short while, and then, Okay, Maggie. No, I think I should just talk to the princess myself. Well, that's not really fair to them, is it? No, absolutely not, I already said I would. Yes, I'll do that. Okay, you too, Maggie. I'll talk to you later. And, thanks for telling me. Erin slumped down by the table, seemingly exhausted. She rested her chin on the dark wood and stared off into space. You okay, Sugarcube? AJ asked her. Not really, Applejack. I just found out that one of my implants included a bunch of drugs that Dr. Velchik, the man who was running things, used to try and manipulate me. Whenever I got too stubborn, he'd inject me, and suddenly I'd end up doing what he wanted. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That's horrible, Rarity said, eyes wide. Why would he do that? Because I wanted to tell you about humans, Erin said. Wait, what? Rainbow Dash sat up, looking shocked. Then her eyes narrowed. Are you telling me that the reason you didn't tell us about humans weeks ago is because some stupid human was making it so you couldn't? Apparently. And I was stupid enough to trust him, Erin said, throwing her forearm over her eyes and sighing. Okay, now I really do forgive you, Erin, Rainbow said, practically vibrating with indignation. If you want to butt that guy, I'll hold him down for you. Erin laughed weakly. Thank you, Rainbow. But that's not even the worst of it. I found out what the implant that the princesses removed from me did. What was it? Twilight asked. It gave them full control of my body. Like, they could move me around like a puppet, if they wanted to, Erin said bitterly. Twilight felt horrified. These were the creatures they were planning on inviting to Equestria. That ain't right, Applejack said, sounding upset. That ain't right at all. Well, the way it was supposed to work, it shouldn't have been able to take over if I was awake. It was supposed to be in case I was knocked out, sick or drugged or something like that. That way, they could get my body back through a fissure and hopefully save my life. But Belcheek decided to modify the programming on it. The way the thing worked, that is. So that he could just control me however he wanted. That's why I passed out in the forest. He'd set it to put me in a coma the moment I tried to tell any pony what was really going on. Well, he's off the guest list, Pinky said, looking shocked. Lucky for me, Maggie found out about it and lodged an ethics complaint. As soon as everyone else found out, he was removed from his position and placed under arrest, and she was put in charge. So, that's good, I guess. Erin idly drew a circle on the table with a hoof tip, then said, I wonder if the princesses would be willing to take the rest of these implants out of me. I should ask them. I don't want them anymore. Erin, Twilight said hesitantly, do you think that's how Malachite managed to possess you? Almost definitely, she replied dully. He was talking to me through my implants, just like the humans do. If he could do that, then it makes sense that he could have taken over the override. Are you going to be okay? Rainbow asked, looking concerned. I don't know, Erin said with a weak smile. Probably. I just need time to process this. A few moments passed, and then Pinky said, well, pooh. This sure put a damper on things. Sorry, Pinky. Not your fault, Erin. Maybe this just means it's time for bed, Erin said with a sigh while standing. I'm kind of tired, anyway. That ain't a bad idea. It's pretty late, after all, Applejack said. Was Spike planning on staying at your mom's house again tonight, Twee? Yes, Twilight said, trying to quash her frustration at not being able to ask Erin more questions about Earth. She loves doting on him, and he loves being doted on. She smiled fondly. Spike was such an endearing little guy. As much as she relied on him, it was sometimes easy to forget that he was still a baby. I'll walk you to your room, Erin, Applejack said. Rainbow Dash quickly asserted that she was going, also, as did Pinkie Pie. Rarity demurred, citing a need for beauty sleep. She bid Erin a sincere farewell, with an accompanying hug. If you ever feel the need to talk, darling, my door is always open to you. Thank you, Rarity, Erin replied. Rarity left for her suite, leaving just the five of them. You coming too, Twilight? Applejack asked. No, Twilight said after a moment of deliberation. I think I should find the princess and let her know how things went tonight. Then she smiled at Erin, saying, and my door is open as well, Erin. If you ever feel the need to talk, let me know, okay? You got it. And, thank you, Twilight. It's not a problem, Erin. But, remember, you still owe me some answers on what Earth is like. Twilight smiled to let her know that she meant it only partially seriously. Erin smiled back. I owe you all a lot more than just some answers, she said. Twilight gave her a quick hug, and then left to go find Celestia. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. The four of them walked down the darkened hallway, the sun having long since set. It didn't take long for Erin to reach her room. She almost didn't recognize it without the guards. Many of the doorways in this corridor looked very much the same. Tentatively, she opened the door and looked inside, smiling with relief when she recognized the interior. Well, this is it, she said to the others. Thanks for walking me back. Ain't no problem at all, Erin, AJ said, and gave her a quick hug. Yeah, Rainbow Dash said, adding, and remember, I'll help you clobber that. Whatever guy, whatever his name was, if you want. And, remember, we're all here to talk to you if you need us, Pinky put in. Thank you, I really appreciate it. And, there's so much more for us to talk about. You deserve to know everything. I trust ya, Applejack said, smiling. Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow, Erin agreed. They said the good nights, and there were a couple more hugs. The three ponies started walking away as Erin was closing her door. She made her way to the bed, and then noticed a large, brown package on her nightstand. Concerned that she had, in fact, wandered into the wrong room by mistake, she was about to leave before she decided to look at the shipping label. It had the FedEx logo on it, and it was addressed to Sunflower, Royal Castle, Canterlot. Intrigued, Erin ripped the brown packaging off. Inside was a card and a thick cardboard box. She managed to open up the card well enough to read it. Dear Sunflower. We heard that you had a bit of trouble after the Iron Pony competition, and that you had to go to the castle for the princess to heal you up. We also heard that you were doing better, which is great news. We wish you the best, and hope that you have a speedy recovery. This place just isn't the same without you. Get well soon. Warmest regards. Your coworkers and friends. Speedy, Parcel and Lucky. Honestly touched, Erin carefully put the card to one side. Then, curious, she opened the box. The familiar smell hit her, and she grinned. Complicated. I'm a bit concerned. Yes, sir, I know. Maggie tried to stay relaxed, which wasn't the easiest thing to do. They were in a large conference room, with a solid oak table that probably cost more than Maggie made in a year. Around the table with her were several very serious men and women in very serious suits. Under her lab coat, Maggie was wearing an old, faded brown sweater and a pair of washed-out denim jeans. She was really regretting her choice of casual wardrobe at the moment. She's entirely off mission, the man continued. He was a skinny, balding man in his 50s with round, steel glasses and the pinched face of someone who'd taken a bite out of a lemon. Maggie could tell that she was going to just have lots of fun with him. Not for the first time, she wished that Paul hadn't turned out to be such a bastard. He was much better at dealing with this sort of thing than she was. Yes, sir, I'm the one who reported it to you, remember? He looked at her, frowning, over the top of his glasses. Yes, I remember. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Use her, Maggie replied, simply. Excuse me. Maggie sighed. It was too early for this. She was still only halfway through her first cup of coffee. She took another sip before continuing. She wants to be of use, so use her. She's our only point of contact with the equestrian government right now. She's got a direct line to the princesses, and she's on good terms with many of the ponies there already. Let her do what she's already doing so well, and just give her some guidance. Yes, well, the man, whose name was Frank Adams, said dryly, for what it's worth, we agree with you. But only to the extent that we need to do some damage control. Melissa. One of the other women in the room, a slim blonde lady in her mid-50s with a figure that Maggie was trying very hard not to resent her for, came around and handed her a tablet. Here you go, Melissa said. Please go through this documentation as soon as you can, before the next time you talk to Erin. What is all this? Maggie said, activating the tablet and looking through the index. Well, there are a few things, Melissa said. Instructions for Erin, a prepared speech that we want her to read to the princesses as soon as possible, a shipping manifest for the equipment that will be arriving here in the next few days for our ambassadorial staff, that kind of thing. It's all in there, and if you have any questions, you can always call us. Instructions. I see. Maggie quickly scanned them, then frowned. Well, I'll be sure to pass these on, and inform Erin to use her best judgment when it comes to following them. We were hoping you could be a bit more persuasive than that, Mr. Adams said. Ah. I see. Let me just remind you all of something, Maggie said. Forget for a moment that Erin is a volunteer, and a free citizen of the US, and on a completely different planet, and therefore can't really be coerced to do anything, okay? Instead, focus on this being a young lady who sacrificed her very humanity, albeit temporarily, in order to undertake a mission to an unknown world in order to make first contact with an alien species. During this mission, she was lied to and manipulated by the previous head of the team in one of the most horrific and invasive ways I can imagine. Have you all seen the latest data? The people around the table affirmed they had. But I don't see. Mr. Adams started. No, you don't. Erin's hardware, for lack of a better term, was compromised. This allowed an alien being named Malachi to take over her entire body, nearly killing her with exhaustion by running flat out for over 4 hours, with only a 20-minute break for water. Can you imagine what that was like for her? She could have died. If she'd been a regular pony, she likely would have died, or at least have been permanently crippled. None of that would have been possible if it hadn't been for Paul Velchik's unethical alteration of the override. Add to that the fact that she was being manipulated with controlled injections of mood-altering drug cocktails. Which she wouldn't have known about if you hadn't told her, he replied archly. Irrelevant, Maggie shot back, annoyed. She was victimized, she deserved to know, and never suggest to me again that administering mood or mind-altering drugs to someone without their knowledge or consent is the right thing to do. Never. Do I make myself clear? I wasn't suggesting. Good. Don't. Anyway, I can't imagine Erin will react well to any sort of attempted manipulations at this point. I will take your suggestions. I will present them tactfully, and I will let her know that the top minds working for our upcoming diplomatic mission suggested that we do things this way. But I won't try to order her, and I won't attempt to bully her. You're forgetting something very important, sir. And what's that? The success of our entire diplomatic mission is currently resting squarely in the hooves of Erin Olsen. Maggie leaned forward and said, let's try to keep her happy, shall we? ****. Hi, Erin. It's Maggie. How are you feeling? I'm doing okay. Just a little tired, I guess. That's not surprising. You've had a rough couple of days. Say, I hate to do this, but the ambassadorial staff came by yesterday and they have a bunch of things they wanted me to tell you. Erin sighed. How much trouble am I in? She asked. You don't worry about trouble, okay? They can disapprove all they want, but they're not the ones over there. If they were so worried about it, then they should have sent a few of their own over. We did make the offer, after all. You did. Erin sounded surprised at that. Yeah, not a one of them volunteered to go, ponified or not. So, they have no say in how you deal with Equestria, if they don't have the guts to go themselves. That's what I say. Anyway, I did say I'd pass this on, but you're under no obligations to follow any of this, understand? Yeah, okay. First, they want you to recite the following prepared statement. Maybe you should get a pencil and paper or something. Sure, hold on. There was the sound of Erin rummaging around coming over the connection, lasting for a few seconds. Okay, shoot, Erin said, and Maggie cleared her throat. Here's the message. Maggie rattled off a series of formalities, with Erin interrupting from time to time to ask for clarification, or to spell a certain name. Then, once those were completed, she got into the actual substance of the letter. The letter itself was simply a statement of humanity's hope that they could negotiate peacefully, and went on to not so subtly state that Erin had no authority to make agreements for humanity, and that an official ambassadorship would be coming within 3 to 4 days. Really, that soon? I thought we had a couple of weeks left, Erin said. We did, but with recent developments, they decided to advance their timetable. Honestly, I have no idea why it's taken them this long as it is. They should have had diplomats over there weeks ago, in my opinion. Well, the ponies are worried, Maggie. I'm not so sure I've done a very good job representing our species. I may have been too honest. I wouldn't worry about it, Erin. I think it's better to tell an unpleasant truth than a pleasant lie, in any case. Yeah, I suppose. Was there anything else? Yes. They want you to ask for room for 12 to 15 people, preferably in the castle and near the princesses. If you could get electricity for them, that would help, as they plan on bringing a lot of equipment with them. Whoa, that's a lot of people. Well, honestly, only 4 of them are diplomatic staff. The rest are scientists and a documentary film crew. What? A film crew? Yeah. Apparently, they want to do a documentary on Equestria, so we can show folks back here what our new home looks like. Or, at least, what it will look like if negotiations work out. So far, Project Harmonix has remained top secret, but I gather that they're going to start making announcements and putting out short movies pretty soon, to get people excited about it. Oh, well, that makes sense, I guess. Would you be able to arrange for transportation? Most of our portals are opening near Ponyville, so that's where they'll probably come out. They'll have a bunch of gear and stuff as well. I'll ask the princesses if they can loan us a few Pegasi with carriages. If not, then maybe we can have you all pile on the train. I'll leave it up to them how they want to do it. Sounds good. Also, they want you to stop talking to the ponies in general. They say that they want you to simply say, I'm not authorized to speak for my people, and tell them that the ambassadorial staff will be arriving in a few days. Huh, and is that an order? Not from me. They said it was a suggestion. As far as I'm concerned, feel free to ignore that one. You've got friends there, and it seems like they think pretty highly of you, all things considered. I think you're doing far more good than harm, but it's up to you how you want to deal with it. Okay. I'll take that under advisement, Erin said in a dry tone. Forget all that for now, though. How are you healing? Are you feeling any better? Oh, yeah. I'm due to get these bandages off tonight. Physically, I feel fine. Maybe a little restless. Well, I haven't been sleeping well, honestly. I'm sorry to hear that. But, things will get better, you know. Yeah. I know. They talked for a while longer about unimportant things, and then signed off. Malachite sighed, putting the drone back down. Erin herself was far outside of his reach. He'd only been able to hear this last conversation because it used the surviving drones as relays. He'd been deep in thought the last few days, thinking of the nature of life, thinking of what he'd done. He was surprised at the guilt he felt. If she'd required this long to recover, then she'd been in worse shape than he thought. The pony he'd once been would have been horrified at what he'd done. Still, it wouldn't be long now, if he knew Celestia. One way or another, his existence in the cave would come to an end, and that very soon. He found himself looking forward to it. *****. The trees flashed by, blurred and indistinct, half hidden in shadows. Strange, unseen creatures growled, snarled and glared at her as she ran past. She was sprinting at a mad pace once again through the dark and overgrown forest, her heart banging in her chest, and her lungs pumping like a bellows. She had no control. Her legs and body moved on its own. Voices whispered in her ear, sometimes Malachite, sometimes Paul Velchik. The darkness of the forest pressed in on her, and she could swear she saw shapes moving in the undergrowth. Hostile things were hunting her, waiting for her to drop, waiting for her to be vulnerable. But she couldn't stop. They wouldn't let her. The feeling of menace closed in around her. She knew that she was running towards some terrible destination, an inevitable doom awaiting her, even though she wasn't sure what that was. She was desperate to stop herself before she got there, but she had no control. The voices in her head just laughed at her. She burst into a clearing. For a moment, she was confused. It hadn't happened this way before, she suddenly realized. She looked up and saw 6 mares standing before her, smiling gently. Her heart leapt suddenly. Help, Erin gasped to them. I'm possessed. Possessed? Pinky asked, looking alarmed. Then, grinning, she said, well, in that case. The power of friendship compels you. A rainbow of light surged over Erin, tingling through her. When it was done, she was on the ground, gasping for breath. She struggled to her aching hooves, blood flowing from her many scratches and cuts. You okay, Erin? Pinkie Pie asked, looking concerned. The other mares had vanished, but Erin hadn't noticed when. I'm hurt, Pinkie, she said, swaying on her swollen and bleeding hooves. Silly, said Pinkie, the elements healed you, remember? Oh yeah, she said. Pinkie looked around with a frown on her face. This is a pretty depressing place, Erin. We should go somewhere more fun, don't you think? Like where? How about Sugarcube Corner? Oh, wait, how about your very favorite place in the world? And that's just where they were. They were standing in dew-laden grass in the early morning light, in the park that was a block away from her childhood home. She gaped in wonder at the playground equipment all around her. It was just as she remembered it. The concrete tube she used to crawl through, pretending it was a tunnel to a magical world. The swing set, empty swings swaying in the breeze. On a nearby hill stood the 20-foot-tall structure shaped like a lighthouse that had a slide coming out of it about halfway up, and the hill it stood on was just perfect for sledding in the winter time. And dominating it all was the expansive wood and steel pipe jungle gym that could be almost anything to a child's imagination. It could be a spaceship, a pirate ship, a fortress, a house or a place to run and hide from the aliens, who were usually her brothers. Erin hadn't been here for years, but she remembered the place fondly. She'd spent many days of her childhood playing here, until becoming a teenager had briefly made this place uncool. How, Pinkie, how did you bring us here? This is on Earth. I didn't bring you, you brought me. Besides, I'm not really here. What? Nothing. Wow, this is neat. Pinkie disappeared into the jungle gym, laughing with joy. Erin smiled and walked after her, feeling her spirits lift. She trotted after her friend, but couldn't find her amidst all the columns and platforms. She wondered momentarily how it could be possible to lose a bright pink pony like that, when Pinkie's head suddenly appeared upside down in front of her. I know you're trying to be strong, Erin, Pinkie said, uncharacteristically serious, but part of being strong is trusting your friends to help you when something bad happens to you. Nothing bad has happened to me, Erin protested. No, Pinkie said, hopping down and landing neatly on her hooves. Then, why the nightmares? Nightmares, she asked, confused. What kind of nightmares could exist in a place like this? Like that one, Pinkie said, pointing with a hoof. Erin turned to look and saw a massive wall of black sludge slowly oozing towards her hometown. Oddly, there was no fear, just an aching, hollow sense of loss. This park would be gone, soon. A part of her childhood, snuffed out forever as soon as the black tide reached it. Talk to us. Tell us how you feel. Even if there's no way we can understand what you went through, you don't need to go through this alone. Promise me that. Okay, Pinky. Pinky, promise. Ha. Here, I'll show you. Pinky quickly ran her through the process, and Erin followed along, finishing with stick a cupcake in my eye. There you go. I bet you feel better already, right? Erin considered that. You know what, Pinky? I think I do, she said, smiling. Great. Well, I've got to get going. And it's time for you to wake up. What are you talking about, Pinky? Erin asked, then blinked in confusion. She was in her apartment in the Royal Palace of Canterlot. Erin stared around owlishly for a few seconds, wondering where Pinky went, until the realization slowly filtered in that it had all been a dream. An amazingly realistic dream, at least the last part of it. The first part was familiar to her, now that she was awake. Each night since she'd first woken up in the palace she'd had the same nightmare. Running, out of control, slowly coming closer and closer to some hidden horror. Last night, though, this dream was the first one she'd had with her pony friends waiting for her in a clearing, the first night she hadn't woken up in a cold sweat. The first morning she'd woken up actually feeling somewhat well rested. Today was her first day without bandages, as well. The doctors had taken them off last night and pronounced her fit. And today was the first time in days that she felt good enough for an early morning run. She could see out of her window that the horizon was glowing, but that the sun hadn't risen quite yet. Her favorite time of the morning. She opened the door to her suite and grinned at her two startled unicorn guards. Hey, fellas, I'm going for a run. Want to join me? I'll buy breakfast. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Celestia smiled as she saw Erin began a brisk run around the gardens, trailed by two confused-looking armored guards. It was good to see her up and about again. She'd spent the last few days recovering, both from the sheer exhaustion caused by Malachite's possession, as well as the later surgery. Princess, a light brown unicorn stallion asked her, waiting patiently on the far end of her balcony. Oh, yes. I apologize, Chancellor. You were saying. The spell is complete, Your Highness. Princess Luna was correct. The veil can be strengthened to an extent that would prevent the fissures from opening, if we so desire. Ah, excellent. Let's hope that we don't need to use it. And was I correct in my assumption as to why the majority of these fissures appear near Ponyville? Yes, Princess. Professor Klostrom's analysis has confirmed that. Celestia had deduced that, since the original fissure had happened near Ponyville, it had weakened the veil slightly, increasing the likelihood of the next fissure occurring in the same vicinity. Each fissure that opened there further weakened the veil, causing more and more of them to open within a few miles of each other. And, are we in any danger? Oh, we would say not, Princess. It would take years' worth of continuous fissures to cause permanent damage to the veil. If these incursions, for lack of a better word, were stopped now, the veil would heal itself completely within a matter of months. Celestia considered that for a long moment. She wanted to help the humans. Erin herself was charming and earnest, with a sincere desire to help her people, but she also obviously felt compassion for what that would mean to the citizens of Equestria and beyond. Not everyone would be so selfless as to consider the well-being of others when their own people were under such a threat. Also, she'd been surprisingly and refreshingly blunt while divulging humanity's nature. War, violence and hatred often seemed to play a role in her people's history, and Erin hadn't shied away from mentioning it, like many others may have done in her position. Though, she had also stressed that this was not normal behavior, and that humans were capable of art, music, love and joy. They sounded like an incredibly diverse people, capable of both incredible cruelty and heartwarming compassion. Celestia knew that she would help them in whatever way was possible, but she had to be wary of the darker aspects of those people. Let me ask you this, then, she asked of the patiently waiting counselor. Could we shift the location of that damage, in order to make new fissures more likely to appear in a different location? Tricky. I'd have to consult with my peers, and Professor Klostrom of course, to be certain. But I believe so. Why do you ask? Because I would like to make Canterlot the location in which these gateways open. It would make diplomacy so much easier, after all. Celestia returned her attention briefly to Erin, who was currently leading her guards on a merry chase around the gardens. On impulse, she decided to speak with her privately before the business of the day started up in earnest. One last question, then, before I go, Celestia said, flaring her wings. The stallion nodded, waiting for the question. Could we cast a spell that would help keep these gateways open indefinitely? An interesting question. I can't think of why not. It's simply a matter of stabilizing an existing fissure. Very good. Please look into it and let me know for certain. Of course, Your Highness. With a final farewell, Celestia sprung from her balcony and glided down to intercept the human. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Erin ran through the gardens, lost in thought and unaware that she was leaving her poor guards behind. It had been a rough few days, and the hardest part was the daily meetings with Celestia and her ministers and counselors, which often felt more like interrogations than planning sessions. The ponies were scared, and it didn't help Erin's mood to realize that it wasn't without basis. After all, the ponies had almost as much to lose as the humans, here. According to Celestia, the total population of Equestria was around 200 million, and that included all the species that lived here. Ponies, mules, zebra, cows and buffalo, the occasional griffin, and so on. The human population would eclipse that 35 to 1, and that wasn't even counting pets and livestock, and whatever other animals they hoped to rescue from Earth. Even counting in all the rest of the known sapient species in this entire world, the total came up to slightly under 1 billion souls, total. To say that Equestria was about to be overwhelmed would be an almost comical understatement. But, try though she might, she still was no closer to figuring out a solution than she had been weeks ago, when she'd first become a pony. She'd also been filling them in on human nature, as she'd promised. She'd initially been tempted to only mention the positive things about humanity, but instantly realized that she couldn't live with herself if she refused to give the princesses a complete picture of human nature. And, though it made her cringe inside to say it, the truth was that humans were occasionally violent, and on a large scale. Various groups of humans hated other groups enough that they would go through years of effort just to eliminate the other group, and oftentimes these grudges lasted centuries. Not that the inhabitants of this world hadn't had the occasional war themselves. Erin's reading of equestrian history had uncovered several. The griffins and minotaurs were seemingly always at each other's throats, and occasionally either of those races came after Equestria. Ponies had the occasional border skirmishes with both of those races, as well as the occasional marauding dragon, diamond dog raids, altercations with the zebra tribes. These things happened on a fairly regular basis. There had even been a minor skirmish with the otherwise very friendly buffalo over a small pony settlement that just happened to be located on buffalo territory, though that one ended with no bloodshed. So, it wasn't that war was unknown here, it just wasn't typically pony-on-pony violence. Trying to explain that humans would fight each other was hard enough. Explaining why got to be more difficult, especially when a lot of times a war was fought in response to the last war. To many of the ponies, it made humans seem insane. They really didn't get that there was a massive difference in theological, political and social ideologies that often separated one tribe of humans from another. Internal pony history had been peaceful since Celestia and Luna had arrived, well over 1,000 years ago. Many of the ministers seemed to be of the opinions that humans were brutish thugs and wanted nothing to do with them. Anything Erin said to try and paint a more complete picture of humanity was largely ignored. She mentioned charitable efforts, large-scale disaster recovery efforts, and so on. Many of the councillors and ministers, who were completely happy to accept the worst things about humanity at face value, were dismissive of anything positive that Erin had to say, assuming it was all just her exaggerating in order to make her species sound better. Celestia and Luna appeared to be reserving judgment until they got the full picture, or at least the overview of the full picture. There was far too much history for Erin to go over all of it, even just what she remembered. She was never a history buff, and she was pretty sure she'd gotten quite a few details wrong as it was. Much more fun to her was going over the state of current Earth technology and society. She'd answered quite a few questions on that end, but a lot of it wasn't clicking with the ponies. How can you explain things like the internet and computer tablets to a society who'd never heard of anything more technologically complicated than an electric light bulb? Just the vastness of the Earth's power grid seemed to confuse them. Twilight Sparkle, by the request of Princess Celestia, was encouraged to attend these sessions. That led to the unfortunate side effect of her friend having a million questions to ask after each session. Twilight said she'd already had a few ideas for improvements in equestrian society. Erin could only warn her to be cautious with the changes she introduced, as many of them could have far-reaching and unforeseen side effects. Really, the only thing she'd refused to do in session or while talking to the princesses privately was to speculate on the strategy of the human ambassadors, who would be coming soon enough, or to speculate on whether humans would wage war with the ponies if they refused to allow the evacuation. She didn't bother explaining that the humans would come regardless of the ponies' wishes. Celestia and Luna already knew that, but if they decided not to tell their counselors and ministers, then it wasn't her place to do so for them. And, in any case, she didn't know what the plan was, and she wasn't about to guess. Unfortunately, that meant that she'd been harassed with various amounts of intensity by different ministers who reported to Celestia and Luna. Some of them had even been downright rude and or accusative. One minister had even pushed his way into Erin's private quarters, demanding explanations and assurances that Erin couldn't and wouldn't give. She'd resolved the situation by leaving her room, running a large lap around the corridors as he'd followed, circling back to her room and slamming the door in his face and engaging the lock. He'd hammered on the door for 20 minutes, bellowing his questions through the door, until Celestia herself had shown up to tell him off. Erin, cognizant of the fact that she was representing her entire species, tried to stay calm and smile during these times, even though she'd sometimes finding herself grinding her teeth. Those stuffy old ponies could be completely insufferable. They would ask questions that were impossible to answer, like how she, personally, could guarantee that no human would ever hurt a pony. And they were unsatisfied with explanations that she had no control over any human but herself. The guards, who had briefly been removed, were now back, though that was more to ensure that she wouldn't be harassed by any more overzealous ministers than to keep Erin herself in check. But Erin also got the sense that the guards were there to reassure the frightened ponies that she was being kept under close observation. She was fine with that. Anything that made the ministers less afraid, and therefore less hostile, was welcome to her. It was a hard enough battle as it was. She did have to roll her eyes discreetly, of course, at some of the things that were discussed. For example, an elderly unicorn stallion named Heartsbloom had spent apparently an entire evening drafting a letter to humanity that strictly forbade them from entering sovereign equestrian territory, and went on at some length, using extremely impressive and flowery language. Naturally, he insisted on reading out in its entirety during committee, but the declaration never specified what the equestrians would do to stop humans if they ignored it. In the end, it was just well-written posturing. Erin's thoughts were interrupted as a large shape swooped out of the air and landed gracefully in front of her. It was the princess herself, and Erin was suddenly very aware of the fact that she'd been running around and sweating without having had a shower yet. She was sure her mane was a mess, and had to resist the urge to brush a hoof through it self-consciously to try and straighten it. Her feet were muddy, and hooves didn't make good combs in any case. "Princess," she said, bowing as she'd seen others do. "How can I help you this morning?" "Good morning, Erin. I just had a few things I'd like to discuss with you this morning, if you have a moment." "Oh, of course." Erin was vaguely aware of her guards, panting with effort, catching up to her. She glanced back and saw them wearily draw themselves to attention. "What happened to you guys?" she asked, concerned. To her surprise, the guards glared at her briefly before snapping a salute to the princess. Celestia nodded graciously to them, and the guards fell in behind them as they started walking together. "How are the arrangements for the human ambassadors coming? Are they to your satisfaction?" "Absolutely, princess. The suite of apartments are, well, they're more than generous. The furnishings will work well for humans, and the menu is just perfect. It won't be a problem if we don't include meat on the menu." "No, we're omnivores. We can survive indefinitely without meat. In fact, quite a few of us are vegetarians." "Oh. I hadn't known that." "Yes, princess. And eggs will do nicely as a meat substitute. Also, you have plenty of fruits, grains, and greens that we can eat. We can't eat hay, though. I had to take that off the menu, along with a few other things." "I see. I hope the chefs weren't too upset with that." The royal chefs of Canterlot were notoriously touchy regarding their menus, and were oftentimes known for their scalding tongues. "Oh, no, they've been most understanding," Erin replied. "I think they enjoy the challenge. The only thing I'm concerned about is that only 2 of the rooms have electricity. But I'm sure they can work around that. I can't imagine that they wouldn't prepare for that by bringing at least a few solar charges." Solar charges? Celestia asked, lifting an eyebrow at her. Ah, yes. They basically absorb sunlight and convert it to electricity. Fascinating, Celestia replied, sounding impressed. So many things we could learn from each other, she trailed off, looking thoughtful. Then she shook her head. That's all for later, Celestia continued. Regarding the Pegasi and carriages to bring the human diplomats here from Ponyville, that may not be necessary. We are working on a method to shift the veil to make it more likely for the fissure to open in Canterlot. Probably out here in the gardens, away from prying eyes and curious crowds. You can do that? Erin asked, amazed. Oh, yes. We can manipulate the veil directly with magic. And that's another thing I wanted to ask you about, Erin. This whole incident has led us to unprecedented study of the veil of Equestria. I know that you're of the opinion that humans will come through one way or another, whether we welcome them or resist them, but that simply isn't true anymore. Erin felt a chill as the princess calmly stated a possible death sentence for her entire species. And your question, princess? Erin asked, cautiously. It is simply this. Celestia stopped walking and turned to face Erin directly. We know from what you've told us that humanity has both the numbers and the weaponry needed to completely dominate our world. In your opinion, what would happen if we forbade those weapons from our world? I don't want to speculate, Erin said, panicked and at a loss. Please, Erin, this isn't a diplomatic conference. Nothing you say now will be considered binding by me. I wish to resolve this situation as peacefully as possible, but it makes me uneasy. Thinking of those weapons here. Once across into our world, humanity would be able to dominate us as completely as you dominate your herd animals. I don't want that. I don't believe that you do, either. Erin stared at the ground by her hooves, torn with indecision. What should she say? The truth was that she didn't know how humanity would act in that situation. Honestly, there would be no single way they would react. The more she considered it, the more she realized that there wasn't an easy answer. There's no way to say, Celestia, she said, finally. If such an ultimatum were leveled, I think the reactions would be very mixed, to say the least. Some would be willing to do it, many would refuse, and try to force their way in, regardless. I'm thinking many governments and individuals would try to sneak weapons in spite of your wishes. By asking that, you're essentially asking them to be completely helpless. We don't have magic or wings like ponies do, we just have our technology to protect ourselves. Basically, they're giving up their homes and their lives and their lands already, and you'd essentially be asking them to give up their ability to defend themselves, as well. There's really no way to say how humanity in general will act, because we don't speak with one voice. I think, if you banned weapons of war like tanks, bombs and jets, that would probably be accepted. At least, by most people if not by most governments. Trying to take away personal weapons like rifles and guns. I think that would make people afraid of what you were planning on doing to them. I hadn't thought of it that way, Celestia replied. They walked together in silence for a few seconds while Celestia mulled things over, then the princess spoke again. And how are you doing yourself, dear? The princess asked. Have you recovered fully? Yes, princess. The doctors said so last night, and I feel pretty good now, actually. I'm very pleased that you suffered no lasting damage from Malachite's misuse of you, Celestia said. Erin glanced at the princess and saw a slight frown on her regal features. She recalled, suddenly, some parts of the conversation between Malachite and Celestia. Most of that night was a blur, but one thing did stand out. He was a student of yours, wasn't he? Erin asked. Celestia's eyes looked pained when she mentioned that. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. No, my dear, it's all right. Yes, he was, many years ago. I'd rarely met a mind as brilliant as his. He made vast inroads into the study of pony physiology and the biological nature of magic. Much of what he discovered is still being taught today. I thought I'd lost him centuries ago, Celestia continued with a sigh. Instead, I was instrumental in his death. Something clicked over in Erin's mind, as another part of that nightmarish night surfaced in her head. I don't think he's dead, she said without thinking. Celestia halted in her tracks and stared at her intensely. What was that? The princess asked her. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned sooner, but I was exhausted, and it was all a blur. I just forgot, and then I passed out. Erin, Celestia interrupted, laying a gentle hoof on her shoulder. It's all right, just explain what you mean. He babbled a lot when he was controlling me, Erin replied, shuddering. I think he was lonely. He said he hadn't talked to any pony in 800 years. But he was talking about a sanctuary. Somewhere he built to hide, while you eliminated the Fey swarms from Equestria. Somewhere, he believed, that you wouldn't be able to break into. Celestia looked away towards the horizon while Erin was talking, frowning slightly. Go on, she said. What else did he say? Something about using life force to generate a shield, and locking himself in, somehow. He said it was a foolish mistake. Did he say where this sanctuary was? Celestia asked. No, but I had a feeling that he was running me straight to it. If you follow my path from Ponyville, you'd probably find it somewhere along that route. He kept saying we were close when you found us. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Erin. If you'll excuse me, I need to take care of this. Erin watched as Celestia flew away, feeling uneasy. She'd never expected to see the princess out of sorts. Something seemed significantly wrong with that. Miss, one of the guards asked, interrupting her train of thought. Oh, Erin shook herself, looking away from the princess. Yeah, let's head back. And, I guess I owe you guys breakfast, right? She trotted back towards the palace, not hearing as one of the guards behind her said, she knows we get our food provided by the mess hall, right? Tilde. Twilight Sparkle wasn't exactly an early riser. She tended to study until late at night, going to bed only a few hours before most ponies woke up. That may be why she felt a little cranky that morning, not joining in very much in the early morning banter around the breakfast table. The door opened and Erin, mane and tail still slightly damp from her morning shower, made her way into the room. The rest of the friends were already seated and eating. Along the wall, several trays of food were set out buffet style, so that every pony could take as much of her favorites as she wished. Rarity was nibbling delicately on some blueberry crepes, Applejack had oatmeal and toast with jam, Rainbow Dash was busily demolishing a stack of waffles, and Pinkie had a truly impressive stack of pastries in front of her. For Twilight's breakfast, she was trying the Castle Kitchen's oatcakes. She hated to admit it, but they were as good as her mother's. Maybe even a little better. As was now routine, Erin and the other ponies exchanged cheery greetings, and Erin trotted over to the buffet to grab a plate of food for herself. No Fluttershy today, she asked, throwing a couple of oatcakes, some jam and assorted fruits onto her plate. She went back home on the train late last night, Rarity said. She was missing her animal friends and wanted to check on them. She'll be back as soon as she's certain that Zekra is doing a good job caring for them, of which I am certain that she is. I'd like to meet Zekra one day, Erin said, bringing her plate to the table. Twilight scooched over to give her some room. Spying on zebras now, too? Rainbow Dash asked teasingly around a mouthful of waffle. Rarity scolded her for talking with her mouth full, to which the Pegasus rolled her eyes and grinned. You bet, Erin said, with an echoing grin. I won't be happy until I know everything about everything that lives here. Hopefully you won't mind when, once the humans get here, we install spy cameras in every room of your house. You aren't really going to do that, are you? Rainbow asked, wide-eyed. Of course not, Erin said, laughing. She took a bite out of her apple. Sorry we couldn't find a big bucket of meat for you, Erin. I know you humans like that stuff. Rainbow Dash, that's repugnant. Rarity protested. Well, she does. She admitted it. Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be a vegetarian for the rest of my life after coming here, Erin said. Besides, I wouldn't eat meat as a pony. It would be weird. You know, my Griffin ex-friend Gilda used to eat live rats, Rainbow Dash said thoughtfully. I always wondered what that was like. Rarity groaned in disgust and shoved her plate away, glaring at the Pegasus. What? Rainbow asked, innocently. You do quite destroy one's appetite with that kind of talk, Rarity replied. Twilight could sympathize with how Rarity felt, even though she didn't quite feel the same way herself. After all, Aloysius hunted and ate mice. Then again, Opalescence would occasionally hunt, as well. Twilight wondered how much of her friend's revulsion was genuine, and how much was for the sake of drama. You're sure that the humans, ponies and cows don't talk? Twilight asked Erin again. Absolutely sure, Erin replied. I've seen them, actually. The ponies look almost nothing like the ponies here. The cows look a lot like the cows here, but they definitely aren't intelligent at all. It's just that it's hard to wrap my mind around it, Twilight said. We're going to have to figure out how to be very sure that humans don't try to eat anyone that's intelligent. I hope that won't be a problem, Erin replied, though she frowned as she said it. I worry about it, though. Like I've said before, humans aren't used to sharing a world with other intelligent races. There may be some that simply can't accept it. It wouldn't hurt to be careful around strange humans until you get to know them. The thought of being eaten is utterly horrifying, Rarity said with a shudder. We'll just have to trust Celestia to make sure that doesn't happen, Twilight said. She was utterly confident that the princess would take all the necessary steps to ensure everyone's safety. Maybe we should change the subject, Erin suggested. To what? Applejack asked. Well, how about to the fact that Malachite is probably alive? Erin offered glumly. Twilight sat up in shock. You're sure about this? She asked. Not sure, no. I was talking to Celestia this morning, and... You talked to Celestia? Twilight interrupted, feeling a twinge of jealousy. Yeah, it was during my morning run. She came down to ask me a few things, and then we talked a little about him, and it suddenly occurred to me that he might still be alive. But we hit him with the rainbow. Pinkie protested. Yeah, but he wasn't really there, Erin said. He was controlling me remotely. It's like I was a puppet, and he held the strings. When you hit me, you cut the strings, but he's still out there. Now that was unpleasant news, as far as Twilight was concerned. What did the princess say about it? She asked. I think she's going to try to find him. I told her that he's probably along the path I was running, since he apparently needed me to free him. Erin frowned at her breakfast, idly pushing a grape across her plate with her fork. Don't worry, if the princess is going after him, she'll get him, Twilight assured her confidently. Yeah, something like that is no problem for the princess, Rainbow Dash said. I suppose, Erin said, though she still looked preoccupied. Suddenly, a thought seemed to occur to her and she looked up at Pinkie Pie. Say, Pinkie, did you have any strange dreams last night? She asked. You bet I did, Pinkie said, surfacing briefly from her abundant hoard of baked goods. Oh, Erin asked, looking slightly spooked. What was it about? I was in a land that was made entirely out of donuts, Pinkie said, eyes wide. It was the weirdest dream I've ever had. Really? Oh, yeah. Usually it's cake. Pinkie flashed a grin around the table before returning her attention to Erin. Why do you ask? I just had kind of a weird dream last night, and you were in it, Erin said. Oh, Pinkie cocked her head to one side inquisitively. What kind of dream? Well, Erin hesitated, then sighed. Okay, I've been having nightmares every night since coming to the castle. Basically, well, I'm running through the forest again, with no control over my body, and either Dr. Velchik or Malachite are talking in my ear. And I'm running towards something bad, really bad, though I don't know what it is. And I can't make myself stop. Last night was different, though. Usually, I just wake up right before I get to the big scary whatever it is that I was running towards. But last night I came out into a clearing, and you all were there, and you hit me with the elements. After that, all of you but Pinkie were gone, and then she said we should go to my favorite place in the world. Ooh, neat. Where did we go? Pinkie asked, bouncing slightly. A park where I used to play when I was a little girl, Erin said, smiling fondly at the memory. And you, Dream You, said that I should talk to my friends about my nightmares. Dream Me is pretty smart, Pinkie said, nodding. Erin laughed and nodded at that. Yes, she is, Erin replied, smiling. It ain't no surprise it's bothering you, Erin, Applejack said. That situation was scary enough on the outside, I can't imagine what it was like to go through it. It doesn't help to know that he's probably still out there, too, Erin said morosely. Something in her voice made Twilight's heart catch, a kind of hopelessness that reminded her of when discord had turned her friends against their own natures. Twilight glanced around the table and saw her own feelings reflected in her friend's eyes. Erin, Twilight said, laying a hoof on her shoulder, we're here now, and we're willing to listen. Do you want to talk about it? Erin glanced up to see the same warm expression on each of the friends' faces. Twilight saw her smile as tears gathered in her eyes. Yes, I would. And thank you all. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. That's completely absurd, an elderly teal unicorn mare named Thistlewood shouted. We can't do that, it's monstrous. I don't see that we have a choice, Blizzard replied, shaking his ice blue mane. We simply cannot provide an adequate environment to support potentially billions of herd animals. If these creatures are really as unintelligent as the human says, then we simply must leave them behind. And I tell you that suggestion is wholly unacceptable. We can't leave those animals to die. Thistlewood responded fiercely. It doesn't matter, they'll die regardless, either from this tide thing on the human world, or of starvation here. Equestria simply can't contain that many living creatures and still thrive. Neither of you are listening to me, Heartsbloom said in his oddly deep voice. The humans aren't coming here regardless. I've already written a declaration. Nuts to your declaration, said a burgundy Pegasus mare that Erin was unfamiliar with. We're not going to leave an entire sapient species to die, just because it may make life difficult for us. What about my lottery suggestion? Ivory Wing said, spreading his namesake pure white wings to make himself more noticeable. Your lottery idea is even worse nonsense than Blizzard's idea to leave the herd animals behind, Thistlewood snapped. I don't see why, Ivory Wing said calmly. We obviously can't support 7 billion of these humans. Why not just allow 50 million or so in? That's plenty for them to continue as a species without overloading our resources to the breaking point. The argument raged on. Erin frowned, resisting the urge to rub at her throbbing temples. These sessions were always worse when Celestia wasn't here. The meeting had started on time for once, but the princess hadn't arrived yet. We simply have to tell them to stop having children until the population gets down to a manageable level, a blue unicorn was saying in what she probably thought was a reasonable tone of voice. And then we can allow the rest of them to come over. Erin stifled a snort of irritation. Humanity had seen the lowest birth rate since the Black Tide impact in all of recorded history, and even after 3 years it still wasn't enough to put a significant dent in the worldwide population. It could take decades before enough humans died of old age for Equestria to be comfortable with allowing the remaining humans to come over. Decades that the Earth didn't have. The debate continued in that vein for another half hour before Celestia arrived, spreading her wings in a signal for silence. My dear ponies, she began. I appreciate the time and effort that you've put into this discussion. However, the time for planning is over. The humans will be here soon, and my sister and I have made our decisions. Erin perked up, scarcely daring to breathe as she waited for the princess's decision. We are going to help them, Celestia said, and Erin breathed a sigh of relief. The council chamber erupted with protests. Your Highness, I must protest, Heartsbloom shouted, his voice echoing loudly around the chamber. We can't allow a species as warlike as this to come to our world. I understand your concerns. However, from everything that Erin has told me, they are no worse than ponies. How can you say that, princess? Ponies have never warred with ponies in all of recorded history. Oh, the princess said, arching an eyebrow. I happen to predate recorded history, if you recall. Do you remember the hearth-warming Eve story of the founding of Equestria? The ponies in the council chambers muttered to each other in confusion. Do you believe the Wendigos were able to blanket the land with snow over a simple argument? Celestia asked, gazing around the chamber. What is left out of the modern-day retelling of that story is much the conflict that caused ponies to seek out a new land in the first place. The different tribes of ponies did not just argue. They fought, and they killed, trying to impose their wills on one another. The 3 tribes were devastated almost to the point of extinction before they fled their ruined land. Erin could hear the whispered protests coming from the crowd below. I assure you, this is completely true. And, when the first settlers arrived here and found the other tribes arriving as well, they began again to kill one another once again over old slights. It took a revolution from the so-called lower classes to overthrow the old nobility and bring peace to the land. And, since that time, we have learned a better way to live. A cooperative way. There were only 2 other inter-pony wars since then, and those were very minor affairs, fought between surviving nobles and the new equestrian government. Why have we never heard of this? Thistlewood asked, wide-eyed. Because nobody wants to remember the horrors of our past, and what we did to each other in the name of what we thought was right. If you go back far enough in the archives of the Royal Library, you will find the scrolls that describe these wars. Celestia looked calmly around the room, stating, you say that we can't allow humanity to come to Equestria, because they are warlike barbarians. But I assure you, they are no worse than we were, in our time. We have learned a better way. Judging by what I've seen of Erin's behavior, I believe that humanity can, as well. Regardless, we shall help them, because it is the correct and noble thing to do, and we are correct and noble ponies, are we not? If there were any who disagreed, their voices weren't heard as the rest voiced their affirmations. However, we are going to help them on our terms. Turning towards Erin, Celestia said, Erin, I know you are not authorized to speak for your people, but I would like you to pass these terms on, if you could. Of course, Princess, Erin said apprehensively, assuming that we're able to talk again before they arrive later this week. Understood, Celestia said, inclining her head. The first condition is that we will allow all humans who want to come here, provided that they each swear an oath to not harm any sapient creature native to our world, excepting in self-defense. That is non-negotiable. Can we trust these humans to keep their words? Blizzard asked. Celestia raised an eyebrow to Erin in an unasked question. Well, she said nervously, I believe that most of us will. Not all of us keep our promises, though, you see. We can't trust them, Heartsbloom said. Princess, I really must protest. It's noted, Heartsbloom, Celestia replied, as placid as calm water. That is good enough for me, Erin. There was some grumbling in the chamber, which quieted as Celestia continued. The second requirement is that the humans acknowledge that, whilst in Equestria or any other nation of this world, they are bound by the laws of that nation. They can pass their own laws, but the laws of their host nation supersedes their own in the case of any conflict. That sounds reasonable. I don't see that being any kind of a problem, Erin said. The third touches on what we discussed earlier today. I won't allow them to bring their war machines to our world. However, I will allow personal weapons such as these. Guns, I believe you called them. They may bring those, so that they can protect themselves as a species, and so that they may still feel safe. Erin was relieved. The governments probably wouldn't be happy, but she believed that most people would. What about support vehicles, Princess? She asked. What do you mean? Well, our military has a lot of machines that aren't specifically designed to hurt people. Transports, trucks, helicopters, things like that. Will they be allowed over, provided they aren't weaponized? I believe that would be acceptable, though I would want a representative of our government to review these vehicles first, Celestia said. There is one final condition. We won't evacuate humanity to our world until we are absolutely sure that we've tried everything we can to destroy the Black Tide on Earth. We may be able to make this migration unnecessary. Princess, Erin replied hesitantly, we've tried everything we can think of. Nothing did anything more to slow it down. You tried everything on your world, but there's something that you missed, Celestia said, smiling. Then her horn started glowing. Magic, Erin said, excitedly. Indeed. It might be possible that we can solve this problem for you, thus eliminating the need to evacuate your home world. I would like for you to extend my offer to your people. We will do everything in our power to save your world, if they allow us access. Erin felt hope flare in her chest at the thought. Maybe magic could do what science couldn't. It seemed almost too easy of an answer, but wasn't that what magic was for? To surpass the boundaries of physics. That's, wow, Princess, thank you. I mean, I can't say yes, of course, but I can't see that they'd turn you down. Don't get your hopes up too far, Celestia said, chuckling at her obvious excitement. It may very well be that we have to bring humanity here, regardless. And, for that, I have another suggestion. Celestia's horn glowed again, and a large roll floated into the chambers. Celestia unrolled it, and Erin recognized it as a large map of the world. Here we are, Celestia said, indicating a portion of the map. As you can see, we are a large nation. Only the zebra tribes cover more territory than us, and they're much more sparsely populated. I've been in negotiations with the zebra ambassadors for the last few days, and we have finally reached an agreement, pending an unsatisfactory resolution of our attempts to eradicate the Black Tide. Celestia floated a pointer out with her magic and tapped on a section of northern Equestria. The zebra nations have agreed to exchange some of our territory, specifically this area here, for the much larger and nearly unpopulated land of Zanabra, here. Celestia tapped a large land on the map that looked roughly 50% larger than Australia. This land is mostly inhospitable desert right now, but with some Pegasi volunteers controlling the weather and with Earth ponies working together with the human farmers, I'm certain we can turn it into a land of abundance and comfort within a decade. This is where we will settle the humans. A decade? Erin asked, alarmed, though her voice was drowned out by the outraged protesting of several councillors. Give up our sacred land. Heartsbloom's voice boomed out angrily. Why should we do such a thing? Because life is more sacred than land, and because giving up a few dozen square miles of land that we're barely using is an extremely small price to pay to save the lives of so many. And, most importantly, because not helping them in such a desperate time would make us into something less noble than we currently are. Celestia said all of that calmly, firmly, but without any kind of sternness or anger. The protests in the chambers muted to a dull muttering. And, yes, Erin, it will take a decade before that land is able to support the human race. It will be crowded, as well, but I understand that your kind are very good at building compact housing. And, once your kind has acclimatized to living on this world, the various nations can allow migrations of the human populations within their borders. If humanity accepts my offer, you have my personal guarantee that they will not starve. I've already asked the farmers to begin increasing their crop production. By this time next year, Equestria will be producing enough food to make up for any shortfall from the land of Zanabra. In return, we merely ask that you send us teachers, so that we may learn your science, and engineers, to help us build some of the wonderful things that you've told us about. But that would be on a voluntary basis, and they will be compensated for their time. Celestia smiled gently at her, and said, it may be that you will have to ration your food for a few years, but we will do everything we can to keep you alive. Erin didn't know what to say about that. On the one hand, it was a good solution for many problems. Keeping the humans separate would prevent any unfortunate misunderstandings with the local sapient creatures, and would also probably comfort the more xenophobic of both humans and ponies. On the other, it seemed a little bit too much like segregation for her to be completely comfortable with it. Still, if they had their own land, then they could set up their own governments and laws. Erin was hopeful that it could be done without bloodshed. She knew from past experience that humanity had a great capacity to band together in the face of a common threat or difficulty. The Black Tide had almost completely ended war on Earth, ushering in an age of unprecedented peace and cooperation. It was probably the best solution. Erin certainly couldn't think of a better one, herself. It was definitely better than humanity stripping Equestria bare like a swarm of locusts or being devoured by the tide. Thank you, Princess, she said sincerely. I will pass along your generous offer. ****. Several large war chariots, each drawn by 4 Pegasi royal guards, descended slowly to the lifeless earth. As soon as they touched down, their occupants, all royal guards themselves, exited quickly and efficiently. The object of their attentions was a small cabin in the middle of a near-perfect ring of deadened plant life. The earth itself was barren and dusty, barely held down by the crumbling roots of the dead and dying trees and shrubs. Celestia herself touched down lightly, regarding the area around her with cautious interest. It was like her guards had told her, a dead zone in the middle of the wilderness, all surrounding this cave. If she'd had a map, a line drawn between Sweet Apple Acres and the clearing where they'd recovered Erin would have led straight here. There was no doubt in her mind that this was the place. It had taken her guards slightly less than a day to find it and report back. The cave was really nothing more than a small mound of rocks with a gap in the front, leading to deep darkness within. Celestia's skin tingled eerily as she approached it, and she knew immediately that the feeling wasn't natural. Be on your guard, she told the soldiers around her. There is a spell here that saps life force. Be cautious where you step, and stay away from the cave mouth. The guards all nodded. Their captain, a grizzled Pegasus named Stormfront, set them in a perimeter around the cave, in 2 rings, one inside of the other. Earth ponies and unicorns alternated position. The Pegasi arranged themselves overhead, forming a dome of soldiers over the cave itself. Celestia approached the opening cautiously and noted the bleach bones in a heap near the cave entrance. The horned skull stared at her mournfully, and the princess felt a surge of remorse, both for what had already happened, and for what she had to do next. Malachite, she called gently. We need to talk. The voice that responded sounded so very similar to the hated buzzing of the face swarms that it made Celestia's skin crawl. But she recognized the echo of her student's voice from within the voice of the swarm. Hello, Celestia. It took you less time to find me than I'd hoped. I'm afraid it wasn't difficult. The course that you made Erin run led straight here. I know. And, for what it's worth, I truly am sorry for what I did to her. I believe you, Malachite, Celestia replied. But I can't allow the face swarms to rise again in Equestria. I know, Malachite said. And, believe it or not, I have come to accept that. This cave, it has been my sanctuary for so long, the perfect fortress to protect me. The very life energy that fuels the shield keeps me fed and whole. And yet, I locked myself in. Did you see the bones? Yes, I did. So foolish. So foolish. I was so certain that I could retain control of my body through the shield. When I activated it, I found that I could not. The poor dumb thing just stood there until it collapsed and died. Malachite sighed, then, a bitter sound. I can't describe to you how it felt to watch my own body die and be able to do nothing about it, Celestia. It died of thirst, and it even rained on the second day I was here. With my mind removed from it, there was nothing to tell it to drink, even as it stood in a puddle of rainwater. And sir, it died. It rotted, and now only the bones remain, a constant reminder of my failure and foolishness. I can release you from this prison, Celestia said, kindly. You can see the sun again, feel the wind once more. Allow me to take you back to Canterlot. I shall have to imprison you again, but we can search for a way to fix this. Perhaps we can remove your mind from the swarm. Perhaps we can find some way to give you back a measure of the life you lost when you entered this unholy pact. Malachite sighed heavily. Believe me, princess, I have thought about this for centuries. The only way to part me from the swarm is to kill me. I don't want to die, Celestia, but I've come to a hard realization in the last few days. When I controlled Erin, that was the first time in over 8 centuries that I'd actually felt alive. I can't stand this any longer. I simply can't. I've survived for too long like this. This body, this cave, this prison. And I can't even go properly insane. This form isn't suited for it, did you know that? For 800 years I've been stuck here, forced to remain stark, raving sane. There were a few seconds of silence, and then Malachite said, death would be a kindness to me now, Celestia. Far better to die than to live on like this. I will tell you how to deactivate the shield. And then I will ask for your mercy. Thank you, Malachite, Celestia replied, bowing her head. Malachite called instructions through the entrance. The shield was unlocked by the careful tapping of selected stones with her hooves, in a specific order, with a certain rhythm. Celestia felt the stones drain a minuscule portion of her energy with each tap, to power the spell that would unlock the gate. After a few moments of instructions and tapping, there was a flickering over the mouth of the cave. The shield flared briefly, and then went dark. Celestia backed away from the entrance. Behind her, the guards redoubled their vigilance, wary of a last-ditch escape attempt. The shadows in the cavern moved, and Malachite himself stepped out. Or, perhaps, flowed out would be a better word. Shaped of darkness, formless and vague, Malachite pulled himself out into the afternoon sunlight. Thousands upon thousands of sickly greenish dots shifted through his form, looking like fireflies trapped in smoke. Those were the bodies of the face swarm itself, bound together by the will of Malachite into a collective shape. The shadows formed themselves into the rough approximation of the body of a large stallion. A pair of glowing jade green eyes stared out from the head, which bowed in deference to Celestia. My princess, Malachite said in the voice of the swarm. It truly is a pleasure to see you once again with mine own eyes. Malachite, in spite of everything, I am glad to see you once again, and to be able to say, farewell. May I have just 3 final requests, princess? Celestia tensed. She wasn't adverse to granting a last request, but Malachite's mind had been one of the sharpest she'd ever known, and now it had been warped not only by being fused to the swarm, but by 8 centuries of isolation. She'd be a fool to not expect a trick. You may make your requests, Malachite, and I may or may not grant them, she told him warily. Peace, princess. My first request is merely to stand in your sun once again. The light I received in the cave was a poor substitute, if I may. You may, Celestia said, standing aside. Malachite moved slowly, stepping forward on limbs that were formed of dark smoke. He moved out into the clearing of death, looking around slowly. He saw the guards encircling him both on the ground and in the air and chuckled wryly. Taking no chances, are we, Celestia? He asked. Of course not, Celestia said. I have far too much respect for you to take you lightly. Malachite hesitated, looking at her with apparent surprise. That was unexpected. Thank you, princess. Malachite seemed content to just stand in the sun, feeling the wind against him. He sighed in apparent contentment. I can't tell you how much I've missed this, princess. I really can't. Malachite turned towards her, and for the first time, Celestia noticed a darker shape, solid and black, within his body. What is that? Celestia asked. What, this? Malachite asked, moving the shape out to where she could see it. She recognized one of the probes that Erin's people had sent over, though this one was badly damaged. Simply a memento, nothing more. It doesn't even work properly. It was how my mind got out, you see. These devices all talk to one another, in a way that bypassed my rather ingenious shield. If it weren't for this one, I'd still be in that cave, probably requiring another few centuries before anybody found me. Please put it down, Malachite, Celestia said. Put it. Oh, of course. Malachite casually tossed the probe away, back towards the cave. Celestia watched it warily before returning her attention to the shadowy figure. It's barely functional, Celestia. I assure you, there is no way in which I could use that device to manufacture an escape. I prefer to take no chances. What was your second request? Celestia asked, torn between wanting this finished and dreading what must be done. I ask that you deliver my sincerest apologies to Miss Erin Sunflower for so badly abusing her in such a fashion. I was desperate, yes, but what I did was still inexcusable. I almost wish she were here, so that I could beg her forgiveness in person, but I can't imagine she'd wish to be anywhere near me. I will grant that request, Malachite. And your third request? Ah, yes. My third, and final request. The shadowed figure of Malachite moved to face her directly. My final request is not for me, Celestia. It is for you. Me? Celestia asked, surprised. Yes. I request. No, I beg, that you forgive yourself for this day. I know you, or at least I did, and I know how badly what's about to happen would have torn you up back then. I can't imagine it would be any easier for you, now. I ask that you forgive me as well, for putting you through this. Malachite, I thank you, and I forgive you, and, for whatever you may think it's worth, I am sorry as well. Oh, my dear teacher, Malachite said, sadly. Then, grotesquely, the shadowy head split apart in a feral grin. You'll have done nothing to be sorry for. Sheathed in dark green smoke, dozens of probes swarmed out of the cavern mouth. Several of them impacted Celestia, knocking her momentarily sideways. The guards, startled, turned their attention to the new threat. Malachite moved shockingly fast, much faster than Celestia remembered the phase swarms moving. Stop him, she commanded. Her guards attempted to rally while fending off attacks from the maddened machines. Several guards were down, victims of an unfortunate blow to the head. Celestia launched herself into the air, horn glowing. Her magic reached out, attempting to snag the fleeing Malachite, but several of the probes struck her or flew towards her head, distracting her just long enough to lose her grip on her magic. She recovered herself barely in time to see Malachite slip into the still-living underbrush at the edge of the ring of death. Only sheer force of will prevented Celestia from screaming in frustration. Her horn flared, and a bubble of golden light spread out, knocking the remaining probes out of the air. After him, she shouted. Find him. Move in pairs, to prevent him possessing any one of you. Her guards spread out, searching frantically. Celestia joined in the search as well. It wasn't until hours later, when it was time for Celestia to set the sun, that she finally admitted it to herself. Malachite had escaped into the wilds of the Everfree.